Mi-sol is a senior high school student who has always been known for her excellent academic performance and bright smile on her face. But one quiet afternoon in her bedroom, she stood stunned in front of the pregnancy test in her hand. The two clear lines made her mind extremely confused. It signaled a big change that she never expected. Just a few months ago, Mi-sol was still a carefree girl who had a secret crush on her friend Seok-bin. On a fateful rainy night, with the desire to comfort and be closer to the person she liked, Mi-sol thoughtlessly made love to Seok-bin. But she did not know that this impulsive action would drag her into a chaotic spiral that even she herself could not foresee. Mi-sol's academic performance continued to decline. It was time for Mi-sol period, but it still did not appear. At first, Mi-sol did not pay attention. She just thought it was because of too much academic pressure. But over time, her breasts gradually grew larger and her belly gradually grew larger. Mi-sol starved for several days, but her belly did not shrink. Mi-sol started to panic and locked herself in her room. Even her mother could not do anything. After looking up information online, Mi-sol discovered that her condition was very similar to pregnancy. She had no choice but to sneak to the pharmacy and lie that she was buying a pregnancy test for her older sister. When Mi-sol got home, she tested and saw only one line, so she breathed a sigh of relief. But before she could be happy, the second line slowly appeared. Mi-sol could not believe that after just one sexual encounter, she was pregnant. Thinking that there was a problem with the pregnancy test, so she quickly ran to another pharmacy to buy another pregnancy test, but the result was still pregnant. As a 12th grader, Mi-sol could not accept this fact. That night, Mi-sol asked Seok-bin out. She wanted to know what he thought about their relationship. Mi-sol held the pregnancy test tightly and hoped that Seok-bin could admit to their relationship. But Seok-bin avoided the issue. He coldly said that they should study well now and not think about anything else. Mi-sol just kept silent after hearing those heartless words. She didn't know what to do now. Because she loved Seok-bin so much, Mi-sol had no choice but to hide the secret. But for a 12th grader, being pregnant was too difficult to accept. Mi-sol couldn't study normally anymore. Her mind was only thinking what she should to do. Seok-bin discovered this abnormality, but at this moment, he only had his eyes on studying, so he didn't want to care about his girlfriend's affairs. That day, while Mi-sol was cleaning the toilet, a female student came over. This friend asked Mi-sol what she had put in her bra and why it was so big. Moreover, this friend mocked that Mi-sol's belly was also getting bigger. This sentence made Mi-sol extremely angry, so she pushed the female student away, intending to teach this friend a lesson. At this moment, Seok-bin ran over. He scolded Mi-sol without distinguishing right from wrong. Seeing her boyfriend defending another female student scolding her, Mi-sol was heartbroken. She cried and left the school alone. Mi-sol didn't know why she had to silently endure everything while her boyfriend treated her like that. Looking at his girlfriend's back as she left, Seok-bin didn't chase after her, because since he was young, his mother told him that his future was the most important. Mi-sol went to the riverbank alone to relieve her mood. Unexpectedly, a group of thugs noticed her. They surrounded Mi-sol. Their words and gestures were very rude. Mi-sol helplessly shrank back. At this moment, a man appeared. Seeing such a large group of thugs, the man was not afraid at all and directly took action to defeat the thugs. Mi-sol was extremely frightened at this time. She bowed her head to thank him and hurriedly left, but left her notebook there. When Mi-sol got home, her mother pulled her to sit down. Mi-sol's mother heard that recently a female student suddenly got pregnant, causing her academic performance to decline. So Mi-sol's mother told Mi-sol not to come into contact with such people. But Mi-sol's mother didn't know that her daughter was pregnant. That day, Mi-sol passed by a hospital and looked up at the sign of the obstetrics and gynecology department. Suddenly, an idea appeared in her mind, so she sneaked into her mother's room to get a sweater. Then she sat in front of the mirror, took her mother's lipstick, put on makeup, and pretended to be an adult at the hospital. And Mi-sol's intention was very clear. She wanted to have an abortion. But when the doctor called Mi-sol's turn, she suddenly couldn't bear it. Then Mi-sol stood up and left the hospital. She sat on the side of the road, hesitating whether to have an abortion or not. Mi-sol felt something moving in her stomach. It was her child. Mi-sol became more and more panicked as the child grew bigger. She had to make a decision quickly. Mi-sol once again went to Seok-bin and confessed everything. But not only did he not care about Mi-sol, he also questioned whether the pregnancy was his. After confirming many times, Seok-bin finally accepted the truth. But he did not answer Mi-sol and wanted to go to extra classes. But Mi-sol still chased after him and needed an explanation. In the end, Seok-bin could only say that give him a day to think about it. Then Seok-bin left Mi-sol alone and left. When he returned home, Seok-bin was a little sad. After all, this was his fault, but he did not know what to do. Just as he was blaming himself, his mother's words rang in his ears, saying that this family needed him to develop, so he had a plan in his heart. The next day, Seok-bin went to Mi-sol. He firmly said that he wanted her to abort the child. But Mi-sol did not agree because she felt that the child was the crystallization of their love. But Seok-bin did not care about Mi-sol's feelings at all. For the future, Seok-bin insisted want Mi-sol aborting the child. But when Seok-bin looked for many hospitals to have an abortion, the answer he received was that it was illegal. So he took Mi-sol to an internet cafe to search. The clinic said the cost was 500,000 won. As students, they didn't have that much money. After borrowing money everywhere without success, Seok-bin decided to steal money from home. But unexpectedly, Seok-bin was discovered by his mother. After being questioned by his mother, he told her everything. Seokbin's mother, Jungja, always had high hopes for him, so Jungja asked Mi-sol to go out to meet. Jungja didn't say anything but directly slapped Mi-sol and asked if the child in her belly was Seokbin's. Mi-sol cried out in grievance. It was obvious that she was not wrong. Why did she have to suffer so much? Jungja asked who the child was. Mi-sol kept shaking her head and said that she only had Seokbin as boyfriend. Jungja directly collapsed because her son was her hope. At the crucial moment of 12th grade, something like this happened, so Jungja threatened Mi-sol not to tell anyone for the sake of her son's future. At the same time, Jungja asked Mi-sol not to contact Seokbin anymore. Mi-sol could only try to hold back her tears. When she returned home, the whole family realized that something was wrong with Mi-sol. Everyone in the family thought that Mi-sol was under pressure because of studies. Mi-sol's mother felt that she shouldn't be so strict with Mi-sol, so Mi-sol's mother deliberately prepared fruit and drinks for Mi-sol. Mi-sol's mother said that I worked so hard because I didn't want you to become like me. Mi-sol's mother hoped that Mi-sol could become a capable woman. If Mi-sol felt too tired, then don't force herself. Mi-sol just needed to live healthily and happily. Hearing what her mother said, Mi-sol finally couldn't help but cry. She kept apologizing to her mother because her current situation had disappointed her mother's. After her mother left, Mi-sol called Seokbin. Mi-sol wanted to find someone to lean on and comfort her. But Seokbin didn't dare to pick up the phone because he was always mother's pride. He didn't want to disappoint his mother. In order for Mi-sol not to affect Seokbin, Jungja decided to send Seokbin to study abroad. After Seokbin found out, he showed concern for Mi-sol but was immediately scolded by Jungja. He was weak, so he chose to stay silent. But when he left the school door on the second day, he met Mi-sol, who had been waiting for him for a long time. Mi-sol thought that Seokbin had told their story to the outside, so she was slapped by Jungja. She angrily scolded Seokbin for being heartless. Then Mi-sol recounted what happened last night. At this moment, Jungja came over and scolded Mi-sol for not understanding what she said last night. Then Jungja dragged Seokbin home. At this time, Seokbin also realized that his mother had deceived him and bullied Mi-sol. He was now going crazy questioning his mother. After that, Seokbin insisted on being with Mi-sol, but Jungja did not agree to let them be together. Jungja even used death to force Seokbin. Reluctantly, Seokbin agreed to study abroad. The next day, Mi-sol heard her classmates gossiping about Seokbin studying abroad. Before Mi-sol could think much, her phone received a text message. Jungja was waiting for Mi-sol at the school gate. After stopping the car, Mi-sol discovered that this was a maternity hospital. Mi-sol immediately understood that Jungja wanted her to abort the child. Mi-sol did not want to do so, but was still forced inside for a checkup. Under Jungja's persuasion, the hospital agreed to perform the surgery. Mi-sol lay on the operating table. She could clearly feel the baby's heartbeat. After a fierce internal struggle, Mi-sol decided to keep the baby. Then Mi-sol stood up from the operating table and rushed out of the hospital. Jungja chased after Mi-sol and asked her to come back for surgery. Mi-sol said that she would rather die than abort the child. Seeing that, Jungja thought of a way. As long as Mi-sol admitted that the child was not Seokbin's, Jungja would not force her to abort the child. Because of the child in her belly, Mi-sol had no choice but to agree. Jungja said that if Mi-sol ever contacted Seokbin again, she would not forgive Mi-sol. That evening, Seokbin sadly went out to get some fresh air. He took out his phone to call Mi-sol, but thought again and stopped. Now he had no right to contact her anymore. At this time, Mi-sol had just come home from school. Seeing Mi-sol entering Seokbin's house was also very unpleasant. He picked up the public phone and called Mi-sol, telling her to take care of her health. After saying that, he hung up. Mi-sol cried. Then she ran out of school like crazy, wanting to go to the airport to see Seokbin one last time. But Jungja discovered Mi-sol and hurriedly pushed Seokbin onto the air platform. At this time, Mi-sol was 5 months pregnant. Seeing Seokbin enter the terminal, Mi-sol couldn't help but cry because she knew that once he left, it could be for life. What would happen to the child in her belly? Jungja showed her hatred and pulled Mi-sol to take her to have an abortion, so Mi-sol quickly ran out of the airport. When she returned to school, Mi-sol was discovered by teacher Eun-hee. Eun-hee punished Mi-sol to run around the schoolyard 10 times, but before she could run for long, Mi-sol fainted on the road. This made Eun-hee extremely worried, so she rushed Mi-sol to the hospital. But Eun-hee was shocked when the doctor informed her that Mi-sol was pregnant. Eun-hee couldn't believe that such a thing could happen to Mi-sol. In Eun-hee's eyes, Mi-sol had always been a good girl. Eun-hee put her hand on Mi-sol's belly and didn't see anything unusual. But when Eun-hee pulled up Mi-sol's shirt, she discovered that Mi-sol's belly was wrapped in many bandages. It turned out that Mi-sol was afraid that others would find out that she was pregnant, so she wrapped her belly tightly with bandages. Then Eun-hee asked Mi-sol who did it, but Mi-sol didn't answer. At this time, Mi-sol was still thinking about Seokbin. Mi-sol also told Eun-hee not to tell her mother for now. She would find time to explain everything. When Mi-sol returned home, she saw that her mother was busy, so she didn't have the courage to say everything. So Mi-sol could only write down what she wanted to say on paper and give it to her mother when the time came. But Jungja was still not at ease. She was afraid that Mi-sol would use the child to threaten her son in the future. So Jungja went directly to Mi-sol again and asked her to have an abortion. But Mi-sol said that she would give birth to the child. Jungja did not accept. Then Jungja took out a bag of money and gave it to the doctor, hoping that the doctor would tell Mi-sol's mother that Mi-sol was pregnant. Only then could Mi-sol have an abortion. After receiving the phone call, Mi-sol's mother was shocked, but she still didn't believe it and scolded the other person. She didn't believe that her daughter would do such a thing, but she found a bandage wrapped in Mi-sol's room. Before Sun-ah could think much, she received a phone call from Mi-sol's homeroom teacher. After meeting, Sun-ah thought that Mi-sol wasn't doing well in her studies, so Yoon-hee came to find her. But Yoon-hee said that it wasn't a study problem, but that Mi-sol seemed to be pregnant. Sun-ah was even more panicked after hearing that. Sun-ah left Eun-hee alone and hurriedly left. Sun-ah wanted to call Mi-sol to ask about the situation but couldn't get through. Remembering Mi-sol's recent unusual behavior made Sun-ah extremely worried. Right at this moment, when Mi-sol came home from school, Sun-ah rushed over to check on her, hoping that her daughter wouldn't do that. But when she touched Mi-sol's belly, Sun-ah couldn't hold back her emotions anymore. Knowing that she couldn't hide it anymore, Mi-sol had to confess everything. This made Sun-ah even more devastated. She worked hard to raise Mi-sol alone. All her hopes were placed on Mi-sol, but now Mi-sol was pregnant. For a 12th grader, this was truly a terrible thing. When she left, Eun-hee asked Mi-sol who the father of the child was, but Mi-sol said the child didn't have a father. This made Eun-hee misunderstand that Mi-sol was being bullied by a bad guy. Mi-sol still didn't want to involve Seok-bin. She also didn't know if Seok-bin was well abroad and if he often missed her. The next day, Mi-sol was getting ready to go to school, but was called back by her mother. Mi-sol's mother wanted to take her to the hospital for an abortion. Otherwise, Mi-sol wouldn't be able to continue studying. Mi-sol didn't want to, and she didn't even want to take the college entrance exam. Sun-ah angrily slapped her. After being unable to persuade her, Sun-ah decided to leave this world to force Mi-sol. Mi-sol was helpless and had to compromise. But when they arrived at the hospital, they were informed that the fetus was 5 months old and could not be operated on. Sun-ah desperately took Mi-sol to the beach. She felt that life had no meaning anymore, so she wanted to take her daughter to leave this world with her. But Mi-sol did not want to. Mi-sol said that the child said she wanted to live. Perhaps remembering her past self and also choosing to live for the child, Sun-ah finally had to compromise. At first, Sun-ah wanted to ask Yoon-hee to cover up for Mi-sol. After Mi-sol took the university entrance exam, the impact would be much less. But Mi-sol was accidentally seen by Yoon-jung while she was wrapping her belly in the bathroom. Only after Yoon-jung left did Mi-sol calm down a bit. Mi-sol could not let her pregnancy be revealed, so she hurriedly went to Yoon-jung. Mi-sol hoped that Yoon-jung could help her hide this secret. Yoon-jung was about to reply when the bell rang. During class, Mi-sol was always worried and couldn't concentrate. No matter what, she couldn't let others find out about this. So Mi-sol even deliberately invited Yoon-jung to eat fried chicken. But Mi-sol didn't know that Yoon-jung only acted friendly with her on the outside, but in her heart she was jealous and started gossiping about Mi-sol to her friends. Yoon-jung said that Mi-sol was an impure woman, causing the friends who were close to Mi-sol to start avoiding her. Mi-sol could only encourage herself to be strong in the face of these discriminatory looks. But over time, Mi-sol's pregnancy reaction became more and more obvious. Thinking back to the time she spent with Seok-bin, she didn't regret it. Eun-hee also tried to stop her classmates from bad-mouthing Mi-sol. As long as Mi-sol graduated smoothly, the problem could be solved. But the principal found out about this. In order to preserve public reputation, the principal asked Eun-hee to expel Mi-sol. Even the parents of the students were gossiping about this. Sun-ah angrily taught these parents a lesson. But when she returned to the car, she could only cry alone. Mother and daughter had relied on each other since they were young. Their lives had just begun to have hope, but then they fell into despair. Today, Mi-sol went to school but was teased by her friends and even had dirty water splashed on her face. However, Mi-sol did not fight back. Mi-sol thought to herself that as long as she persevered until graduation, everything would be fine. But at this moment, Mi-sol heard from her friends that her mother had been called to the principal's office. Mi-sol immediately panicked. She could endure all the bad gossip, but her mother should not endure this. In the principal's office, Sun-ah begged the principal to give her daughter another chance. But in order to preserve public reputation, the principal refused. For the sake of her daughter's future, Sun-ah was helpless and had to kneel down in front of the principal. At this moment, Mi-sol rushed in. Mi-sol shouted loudly, "Mother." Mi-sol didn't want her mother to suffer because of her, so Mi-sol pulled her mother out of the principal's office. But Sun-ah thought that as long as Mi-sol could complete her studies, she would do anything. But after experiencing all the humiliation, Mi-sol no longer wanted to continue studying here. Jung-ja looked at Sun-ah and Mi-sol. She decided to secretly plan to chase them away. First, she went to the authorities to seal Sun-ah's piano room. Then Jung-ja pretended to be kind and advised Sun-ah to leave here to start a new life. Originally, for the sake of her daughter, Sun-ah was still able to persevere. But when she returned home, Sun-ah discovered that the 3 million tuition fees she had set aside for her daughter had been secretly invested by her younger brother. Although her younger brother said he would definitely pay Sun-ah back, she knew that there was no hope for her daughter to continue studying. Because of too much pain and anger, Sun-ah fainted. Seeing her mother like that because of her, Mi-sol decided to leave with her mother and then start a new life. Before leaving, Mi-sol called Eun-hee. With the teacher who had taken care of her wholeheartedly, Mi-sol still owed Eun-hee too much. But at this point, Mi-sol had no choice but to give up studying and leave. As soon as they was packing the things to leave, Jung-ja went to Sun-ah. Jung-ja as a friend to give give Sun-ah some money. At this time, Sun-ah was very touched, but she did not expect that everything was caused by this good friend. The day after Mi-sol left, Seok-bin returned to the country to do the paperwork. When he went to Mi-sol's house, he was told that she had moved away. Later, at school, he heard rumors that Mi-sol did not know how to take care of herself to get pregnant. Only then did Seok-bin realize that Mi-sol had endured everything alone because she didn't want to affect him. When Seok-bin returned home, Jung-ja said that Mi-sol had an abortion and was now living well. As time went by, the college entrance exam season had come. Watching the news broadcast about the college entrance exam, Sun-ah was heartbroken. Originally, at this time, her daughter was shining brightly, but now everything had changed. It seemed that Mi-sol had discovered that her mother was sad, so she held her mother's hand and signaled her mother not to be sad. Not long after, Mi-sol painfully gave birth in the hospital. But at this time, the baby's father was in a bar dancing with a girl. Time had passed quickly. 7 years had passed. Seok-bin had now returned from abroad. Not only that, he also had a wife. Surprisingly, the wife was Yoon-jung, who had spoken ill of Mi-sol. As for Mi-sol, after giving birth, due to the pressure of life, she had to wake up at 5 a.m. to do milk delivery. At night, Mi-sol still had to work extra jobs everywhere. She wanted to use her labor to give her mother and child a better life, but fate seemed to be teasing her. The milk that Mi-sol delivered was always stolen. Her salary was deducted, making her extremely miserable. Mi-sol decided to catch this thief. That morning, Mi-sol went to deliver milk as usual, but discovered a man sneaking around. It was obvious that he was the milk thief. Although she was a little scared, thinking about her salary being deducted, Mi-sol still picked up a broom and hit the man straight in the face. But the man grabbed the broom and said that he did not the milk thief. Mi-sol was angry, so she did not listen. So she dragged the man to the police station. But when Mi-sol looked at the camera, she felt ashamed. The man she had beaten was not the thief. On the contrary, this man helped her get her milk back. Mi-sol was embarrassed and quickly apologized, but the man took out the broken computer and asked Mi-sol to compensation. Mi-sol was poor and had no money to pay, so she had to mortgage her ID to the man and said that she would pay him back soon. But when Mi-sol checked her savings, she found out that she had no money. The man went home and took out Mi-sol's ID. He found that the name was very familiar, as if he had heard it somewhere, but he did not know that the girl who considered him a thief this morning was the person he had saved from the hands of thugs 7 years ago. Now they met again in this way. To compensate the man, Mi-sol called everywhere to borrow money, but no one would lend her money. That night, Mi-sol was working part-time at a restaurant when she accidentally heard about a high-paying job. Mi-sol applied. Unexpectedly, the job was to be a model for the store. Mi-sol was a conservative person, so it was hard to accept. But at this time, the boss doubled the salary, so Mi-sol was moved. If Mi-sol does this job, not only can she pay off her debt quickly, but she can also buy gifts for her son and mother. While Mi-sol was working, Seok-bin happened to see her when he came home drunk. He was extremely surprised that Mi-sol had to live such a miserable life, but he didn't have the courage to go and ask. When Seok-bin got home, Jung-ja seemed to see that her son had something stranger. She wanted to ask, but Seok-bin avoided it. Seok-bin went back to his room and lay down, with Yoon-jung next to hugging him. But at this moment, Seok-bin only had Mi-sol in his mind. He didn't know what Mi-sol had been through all these years, but it seemed like she hadn't given birth yet. The next day, when Jung-ja went to buy food, a boy got her clothes dirty. At first, Jung-ja wanted to find the child's mother to scold her, but she found out that it was her old best friend. She was worried and quickly ran away. When Jung-ja got back to the car, she realized that the boy just now was most likely Seok-bin's son. Mi-sol went to work as a dancer at night, but Mi-sol was accused of being under 18 and asked to see her identification papers. But her identification papers were kept by a man named So-dong, so Mi-sol had no choice but to call So-dong and ask him to bring them. Although So-dong didn't want to, when he saw her struggling to make a living, So-dong felt a little guilty. He felt that he shouldn't make things difficult for Mi-sol. After So-dong left, Seok-bin passed by after work. Seeing a familiar place, he quickly got out of the car to take a look, but it was too late because the crowd had already dispersed. At this moment, a figure entered Seok-bin's sight. The familiar feeling made him sure that it was Mi-sol, so he quickly chased after her. But ironically, Mi-sol got on the subway. Seok-bin could only chase and call out to Mi-sol, but she was too tired to hear his call. Seok-bin returned home and gently hugged Yoon-jung, but he was thinking about Mi-sol. Because of his studies and future, Seok-bin abandoned Mi-sol according to his mother's arrangement. Mi-sol had to both study and work part-time because she had to raise her child. That day, a friend told Mi-sol that a company was recruiting employees with salaries several times higher than normal. Mi-sol was immediately excited and rushed to apply, but she was shocked when she found out that the interviewer was So-dong. So-dong also recognized her, but he didn't say much. The interview was very simple, asking the candidate to try the beef soup produced by their company. As a result, Mi-sol drank it all in one gulp. So-dong couldn't help but laugh. After the interview, Mi-sol thought that this interview was a failure. So-dong would definitely take revenge on her. So Mi-sol sadly returned to work at the barbecue shop. But Mi-sol was accidentally seen by her mother when her mother and her child passed by. Sun-ah blamed Mi-sol for not studying hard. Mi-sol's mother wanted her to pass the TV station exam so that she could have a stable life in the future. But Mi-sol always worked part-time to earn money to support her family. This made her mother very angry. Just when Mi-sol didn't know how to respond, her father phone suddenly received a text message. Mi-sol opened it and was very surprised to know that she had passed the interview. Mi-sol didn't expect So-dong to not make things difficult for her. The next day, Mi-sol reported to the company early, hoping to perform well. But unexpectedly, the person working with her was So-dong. On the way, So-dong asked Mi-sol why she had to do so much work, but Mi-sol didn't want to answer. While So-dong was talking, Mi-sol even fell asleep. Afraid that Mi-sol would hit her head on the car window, So-dong thoughtfully took a pillow to help her not to hurt. This action was very warm. When they arrived, Mi-sol was woken up by So-dong. Looking at the pillow in Mi-sol's hand, she was a little touched, but So-dong was her enemy, so he deliberately acted cold. He said that he was afraid that she would break the car window, so he gave her the pillow. So-dong arranged work for Mi-sol. He asked her to take inventory of the warehouse. While So-dong was watching Mi-sol work hard, he suddenly realized that the box above was about to fall, so he quickly told her to move away. Mi-sol immediately asked what he wanted to do. So-dong quickly explained that it wasn't him, but that he was worried that the box would fall on Mi-sol, so he rushed to save her, but she slapped him for no apparent reason. Mi-sol didn't know what happened. She thought that So-dong wanted to take this opportunity to molest her. Then she left without looking back. So-dong chased after her to explain because he didn't want to be misunderstood, but Mi-sol scolded him and left angrily. At this time, the box also fell, making Mi-sol realize that So-dong really wanted to save her, but she had scolded him, so she could only bow her head and apologize. On the other side, Junja still remembered what happened at the supermarket. She suspected that it was most likely Seok-bin's biological son. To confirm the situation, she went to all the kindergartens in the community. She finally found the boy. Looking at the child's appearance, Junja was very surprised because the child looked exactly like Seok-bin when he was young. It was certain that this was Seok-bin's son. She did not expect Mi-sol to give birth. Just as she was leaving in panic, she met Sun-ah. The two did not expect to meet again after so many years in this situation, but the child ran to hug Sun-ah and called mother. Junja was confused and did not understand why this child called Sun-ah mother. After that, the two went to a coffee shop to talk. Junja asked if the boy just now was Mi-sol's child. Sun-ah seemed a little nervous, but still denied it. But when Junja asked why the child called Sun-ah mom, she could only lie and say that it was her child after remarrying. Although she was very embarrassed, as a mother, Sun-ah could endure everything to protect her daughter's reputation. The next day, when Mi-sol went to work, she was looked at strangely by her colleagues because her lips and So-dong's were both chapped. Mi-sol had no choice but to say that if she stayed up all night, it would happen, and that her family was like that. It was genetic. Her colleagues asked what about So-dong. He immediately said that his family was also genetic. Under the suspicious eyes of their colleagues, the two quickly left. But when Mi-sol entered the elevator, she met Seok-bin again. Facing the person who had abandoned her, Mi-sol turned around and left, but Seok-bin chased after her and called her back. Seok-bin said it had been a long time since they had seen each other. Mi-sol asked him if he had anything to say. Looking at the man in front of her, Mi-sol tried to hold back her tears and pretended to be strong, but when she turned around and left, she sat down in the corner and cried. So-dong found Mi-sol there. He thought that Mi-sol was skipping work, so he wanted to scold her, but he found that Mi-sol was crying very painfully. This made him a little confused. On the way to work, So-dong asked Mi-sol what happened in a concerned tone, but Mi-sol just kept quiet because she was used to enduring the pain after being abandoned. But when they put up the goods to advertise, a young couple came to try it. That familiar appearance reminded Mi-sol of the past. Seok-bin and she used to love each other very much, but now she was full of wounds in her heart. The panic caused Mi-sol to burn her hand. So-dong, who was beside her, quickly checked. Then he went to find ice, grabbed Mi-sol's hand, and put it there. Facing So-dong's thoughtfulness, Mi-sol felt even more uncomfortable. She didn't understand why she was always the one who got hurt. When she returned, So-dong kept telling jokes that weren't very funny. He just wanted to make Mi-sol happy. He didn't know when So-dong had become attracted to Mi-sol. Even when he went home from work, he had to take the bus with Mi-sol. Mi-sol also smiled more because of So-dong's appearance. Suddenly the car shook, so So-dong unconsciously hugged Mi-sol. The tacit contact gradually developed their relationship. That evening, Mi-sol received a phone call. Seok-bin asked her to meet him to talk. Mi-sol didn't want to contact him anymore, so she hung up the phone. Unexpectedly, after walking a few steps, Mi-sol met Seok-bin. Seok-bin said that they used to be good friends, so she shouldn't avoid him like that. Mi-sol said that they were friends, but he made her suffer for 7 years. Then Seok-bin took out a bag of money, wanting to use it to compensate Mi-sol. For Mi-sol, this was no different from trampling on her self-esteem. Mental pain could not be compensated with money. Mi-sol then told Seok-bin that even if she had to beg on the streets, she would never take his money. After crying silently, Mi-sol returned home, but she found her son was also crying. It turned out that Junja had secretly taken the boy's hair. Junja secretly went to the hospital to do a DNA test. The results shocked Junja. The boy Dongmun was her grandson. Although Junja did not want to accept this grandson, things had come to this point, so she had no other choice. Junja could only go to the kindergarten to visit Dongmun, but found out that the boy was being bullied. The reason was because Dongmun did not have a father. Junja could not help but rush forward and hug Dongmun tightly. At this time, she no longer had any purpose, tricks and schemes, but was just a grandmother who was heartbroken for grandson. Junja even specially bought a game console for Dongmun, but Dongmun went home and told Sun-ah. At this time, Sun Sunna did not know that her best friend was Dongwon's grandmother. Sunna even asked Jungja out to thank her. That day, Mi-sol went home from work and took the elevator, but saw Seok-bin in it. Mi-sol didn't want to be involved with him, so she was about to leave. At this time, So-dong ran over and invited Mi-sol to leave work together. After a moment of hesitation, Mi-sol still entered the elevator. Seeing another man chatting with Mi-sol, Seok-bin suddenly lost his balance. He wondered why this man was so close to Mi-sol. What was their relationship? After leaving the company, Mi-sol stood on the side of the road waiting for the bus. So-dong was afraid that Mi-sol would work too hard, so he specially prepared drinks. He watched Mi-sol until she got on the bus. This action showed that So-dong probably loved Mi-sol. That evening, after finishing school, Mi-sol was preparing to go home, but met Seok-bin, who had been waiting for her for a long time. Mi-sol blamed him for following her. She also said she didn't want to contact Seok-bin anymore, but he said he had never forgotten her for a moment. Mi-sol tried to act calm, but tears fell uncontrollably. After returning home, she couldn't help but cry. Seok-bin was treated coldly by Mi-sol and got drunk. When he got home, Seok-bin didn't look for his wife, but instead lay in his mother's living room. This action made Yoon-jung very angry. She thought that Seok-bin didn't care about her. Yoon-jung showed her attitude towards Seok-bin early in the morning. Seok-bin was worried about Mi-sol's matter, so he was completely out of the mood to care to Yoon-jung. This made Yoon-jung angry and ran away from home. At mother's request, Seok-bin reluctantly gave flowers to Yoon-jung and successfully apologized to her. But right when the two were going to the supermarket, Mi-sol and So-dong also happened to go out to research the market. Ironically, the two women bumped into each other, causing Yoon-jung's wedding ring to fall out. They were close friends before, but now they didn't recognize each other. Yoon-jung said Mi-sol didn't have eyes. Mi-sol kept apologizing. Just as Yoon-jung was angry with Mi-sol, Seok-bin saw this scene, but he secretly ran away. On one side was his wife, on the other side was the girl he once loved deeply, making him extremely embarrassed. At this time, So-dong came over. Seeing Mi-sol lying on the ground made him extremely angry. Mi-sol quickly advised So-dong not to get agitated. Mi-sol also told him to help her find the ring. Before leaving, So-dong criticized Yoon-jung for not being too arrogant. During the whole process, Seok-bin did not speak up to defend Yoon-jung. Yoon-jung angrily cursed him. She wanted Seok-bin to come back and cause trouble for them. Seok-bin was already heartbroken because of Mi-sol, so now he could not bear it anymore. He scolded Yoon-jung for discriminating against others just because of a ring. Yoon-jung did not expect her husband to scold her because of a woman. Was this marriage worth it? As soon as she got home, Yoon-jung told Jungja. She said that Seok-bin did not love her. Jungja could only speak up for her son. Jungja advised Yoon-jung to calm down. On the other side, So-dong and Mi-sol were comfortably eating street food. After drinking a small glass of wine, So-dong mustered up the courage to ask Mi-sol if she had a boyfriend. Mi-sol was very surprised. Then she said that she didn't have one at the moment. So-dong was very happy to hear that. He said that he didn't have a girlfriend either. After returning home, So-dong was full of life. He originally didn't like to dress up, but now he started to mix and match his clothes carefully. Eun-hee finally breathed a sigh of relief when she saw her son's change. When she found out that her son finally had a girlfriend, she said that if they developed well, he would bring his girlfriend to meet her. He also agreed immediately. After a fun day at work with Mi-sol, So-dong didn't leave work with Mi-sol like usual. He knew that Mi-sol would go to the library to study, so he planned to give her a surprise. But when So-dong happily went to the library, he discovered that Mi-sol wasn't there. It turned out that Mi-sol met Seok-bin after work, so he took her to a coffee shop. Seok-bin still wanted to make it up to Mi-sol. Seok-bin even said that he always remembered her. Hearing that, Mi-sol started to get emotional again. She told him what she had suffered all these years. Suddenly, Seok-bin hugged her. He also said that he would not let her be sad anymore. At this time, Seok-bin's younger sister passed by. Seeing that the woman in her brother's arms was the daughter of her mother's best friend, Seok-bin's younger sister immediately called her mother. Jungja always opposed the two of them being together, not knowing what action she would take. Mi-sol returned home and looked at her child. She was a bit hesitant. Mi-sol did not know if she and Seok-bin could start over. The next day at work, Mi-sol was always worried. So-dong also found out. He thought Mi-sol was worried about the exam, so he specially went to find his friend to ask. After a hard day of working for his friend, So-dong finally got the internal documents. So-dong thought that this might help Mi-sol, but at this time, Mi-sol was once again asked out by Seok-bin. The two went to the snack shop they often went to. They were even misunderstood by the owner as being married. Mi-sol's mind was flooded with old memories when she saw a table full of familiar dishes. Seok-bin took the opportunity to give Mi-sol a snack. He also said that she used to like to eat like that. The familiar gesture made Mi-sol accept it out of habit. Seok-bin told her to eat it. Mi-sol hesitated a bit, but still ate it. It seemed like they had returned to their passionate high school days. The two walked together on the path they had walked. Seok-bin didn't forget to record this beautiful moment. At this moment, Mi-sol seemed to have an answer in her heart. Thinking of her son, who was discriminated against by others because he didn't have a father, Mi-sol decided to find her child father. So Mi-sol took the initiative to ask Seok-bin to meet tomorrow. She wanted to take her son Dong-un to meet Seok-bin, but all of this was discovered by Jungja. Jungja recorded Mi-sol's phone number and absolutely did not allow Mi-sol to ruin Seok-bin's future because Seok-bin's uncle had a company but had no children. If nothing unexpected happened, happened, Seokbin would inherit it in the future. But if Seokbin suddenly had a son now, all the good things would be meaningless. The reason Junja chased Mi-sol away before was also because of this reason. Just as Mi-sol was carefully preparing her lunchbox for the gathering, Suna asked her where she was going. Mi-sol said she was going to hang out with friends. But Suna did not understand why Mi-sol had to bring her son to the gathering. How could Suna know that Mi-sol would take her son to meet the child's father? When everything was ready to go, Mi-sol received a phone call from a stranger. That person was Junja, whom Ja asked Mi-sol to meet. Before Mi-sol could sit down, Junja threw a glass of cold water on her. Junja criticized Mi-sol for seducing a married man. Junja said that Seokbin was already married. Mi-sol was shocked when she heard that. Seokbin never told her that he was married. Mi-sol was the victim. Now Mi-sol became the sinner. Seokbin didn't know anything and still held the necklace that he had carefully prepared. He wanted to give Mi-sol a surprise, but was treated coldly by Mi-sol. She questioned Seokbin. He was really married? Seokbin had no choice but to admit it. Seeing Mi-sol in tears, Seokbin panicked and quickly explained that he didn't mean to hide it. Seokbin said that even if he was married, they could still see each other. Mi-sol slapped him after hearing that. She didn't expect him to say such irresponsible words. While she was at a loss, Seokbin loudly said that he was willing to end everything to start over with her. But Mi-sol saw through him. She cried and left. The feeling of being hurt twice by the same person was so painful. But when facing her son, Mi-sol still tried to smile and took him to the park. Perhaps only at this moment could Mi-sol temporarily forget the sadness in her heart. But Domun saw that the other children all had their parents with them, but the boy did not, so he felt very upset. Mi-sol also felt guilty towards her son, so Dong was still waiting for Mi-sol at the library. He just wanted to give Mi-sol a surprise, but he waited all day, but Mi-sol still did not come. He was worried that something was wrong with Mi-sol when he saw her entering the library. This made So-dong extremely happy. He quickly got up to buy a drink, but when he turned back, he found that Mi-sol had left. It was raining heavily outside, and Mi-sol was crying alone in the rain. So-dong chased after Mi-sol, but she fell straight into his arms and fainted. So-dong hurriedly took Mi-sol to the hospital and carefully wiped the rain off her body with a towel. Then So-dong sat silently by the bed. At this time, So-dong's heart was occupied by Mi-sol, but the person Mi-sol liked was not him. Time passed by one night. Mi-sol woke up from her coma. Seeing So-dong sitting next to her, she felt very embarrassed, but So-dong was willing to sacrifice for her. He said that he was not taking care of anyone else, but was taking care of Mi-sol, who was very important to him. Just when Mi-sol didn't know how to answer, So-dong asked why she was in the rain. It seemed that So-dong realized Mi-sol's unnaturalness, so he said that if she didn't want to say it, she didn't need to answer. People don't always have a secret that can't be told. These warm words really touched Mi-sol's heart. After Mi-sol was discharged from the hospital, So-dong wanted to take her home, but Mi-sol seemed to be worried about something. Mi-sol tactfully refused him. Looking at Mi-sol's back as she left, So-dong didn't intend to give up. Meanwhile, Yoon-jung returned home drunk, but she found that Seokbin wasn't home. She called, but no one answered. She was even more certain that Seokbin didn't love her. She cried and told Jungja that she was very lonely. She left her parents to come here with Seokbin, but didn't receive the love she expected. Late at night, Seokbin returned home. As soon as he entered the door, his mother called him back. But at this moment, the weak son yelled at his mother not to test him like that. He asked her if she had gone to cause trouble with Mi-sol. At this moment, he finally mustered up the courage to oppose all of his mother's arrangements. Jungja thought that she did it for his future, so there was nothing wrong. But Seokbin didn't listen. Seeing that Mi-sol had suffered a lot because of him, he wanted to make up for his past mistakes. He even threatened his mother that if she continued to make things difficult for Mi-sol, he would not forgive her. Every time Mi-sol went to work at the company, Seokbin would come to bother her. Because she could no longer bear it, Mi-sol decided to quit her job. This made So-dong sad. The Mi-sol he had always missed did not come to work. So-dong was bored when he suddenly received a text message. His face immediately broke into a smile. It was just because Mi-sol had made an appointment to meet him privately that he rushed over. After a simple conversation, Mi-sol took out a bag of money. She said that although it was not enough to pay for the computer and the fees yesterday, she would definitely pay the rest soon. So-dong's face was a little unnatural. He said that she did not need to be in such a hurry. She could pay him back later when she had the money. He unconsciously wanted to bring their relationship closer, but Mi-sol refused and left, leaving So-dong to sigh. When he got home, So-dong discovered that he had forgotten to give Mi-sol the exam preparation materials, so he hurriedly called Mi-sol to ask her out. When she received the materials, Mi-sol was very happy because it was related to her future. After that, the two happily ate instant noodles on the side of the road. So-dong kept encouraging Mi-sol to be happy and live happily because a bright tomorrow would come. When they said goodbye, So-dong became sad again because they no longer had the chance to work together. The exam preparation materials were also given to Mi-sol, so he probably would not have the chance to see her again. Before Mi-sol got home, she met Seokbin again. He was agitated and wanted to be with Mi-sol. Mi-sol had already realized that he was an irresponsible person, so she didn't pay attention. But as soon as she got home, she was once again threatened by Jungja. Jungja warned Mi-sol to stay away from her son. This made Mi-sol very angry. The next day, Suna's landlord raised her rent, so she had no choice but to take Dongwon to find a job. Unexpectedly, while crossing crossing the street, Dong-eun got into an accident. Dong-eun was hit and fell to the ground, and the driver was Seok-bin's uncle. Luckily, Dong-eun was fine, but Sun-ah and Jin-guk recognized each other. It turned out that the two were childhood friends. Mi-sol came home after a hard day to find her son in a cast. She quickly asked her mother what happened, but her mother said it was just a minor collision and that he would recover after a few days of rest. Sun-ah was afraid that it would affect Mi-sol's studies, so she didn't tell Mi-sol. Hearing this, Mi-sol was very angry. She blamed her mother for not taking good care of Dong-eun, but she didn't know that in her mother's eyes, she was still more important than grandson. Today, Seok-bin's grandmother came to visit her old classmate, but she discovered that her friend's grandson was an employee of her company. When Seok-bin's grandmother left, she suddenly discovered that So-dong looked exactly like her grandson, who had been missing for many years. When Seok-bin's grandmother got home, she suddenly received a phone call. The other end of the line said that the woman who had taken her grandson away had been found. Seok-bin's grandmother was so agitated that she fainted. She was then quickly taken to the hospital. Jung-ja went to visit the hospital and discovered that Mrs. Kang, who had no children, now had hope of finding her grandson, who had been missing for many years. This was something Jung-ja could not accept. Jung-ja wanted her son to be valued by Mrs. Kang, so she had worked hard for many years as a servant. Seeing that her son was about to achieve his goal, Jung-ja was unwilling to end it like this. Jung-ja secretly drove after Mrs. Kang and discovered a clue that would help Mrs. Kang find her grandson. It was the manager of this orphanage. For the sake of her son's future, Jung-ja decided to let this person disappear. So Jung-ja drove her car into that person. Unexpectedly, Jung-ja had an accident while passing through the intersection, so she could only helplessly watch that person leave. When she got home, Jung-ja started complaining. Jung-ja thought that Mrs. Kang was really cruel. Mrs. Kang always said that she treated them like her children, but in her heart she was always looking for her grandson. Although Jung-ja was very unhappy, she still had to continue working. But Jung-ja met So-dong's grandmother, who brought her daughter to visit. The purpose was to marry her daughter to Mrs. Kang's granddaughter. Hearing laughter in the room, Jung-ja was very angry. She didn't expect that there would be someone who wanted to come here to benefit. So, Jung-ja absolutely would not allow such a thing to happen. Today, So-dong was feeling depressed at home when he suddenly received a call from Mi-sol to make an appointment. So-dong excitedly ran out. Mi-sol gave him some study materials. This made So-dong very happy. Although he couldn't use those documents, it proved that Mi-sol still cared about him. While drinking coffee, So-dong accidentally heard that Mi-sol was looking for a job again. He thought that she had quit her job because of him, but in fact it wasn't. When he got home, So-dong wanted to see Mi-sol off, but she still tactfully refused. Unexpectedly, as soon as Mi-sol got on the bus, she discovered So-dong following her on a motorbike. This unexpected touching feeling made Mi-sol a little moved. But when Mi-sol arrived at the front door, she met Seok-bin again. Before the two could say anything, Jung-ja called Mi-sol. Seok-bin angrily picked up the phone and told his mother not to bother with him anymore. As a result, he was informed that everything was over. Once again, he was rejected by Mi-sol. Seok-bin sadly returned home, but he discovered that his mother had been missing for more than 10 hours. Thinking of his mother's tone on the phone, Seok-bin was afraid that his mother would leave this world. The whole family hurriedly went to look for Jung-ja. They finally found Jung-ja in the park behind the mountain. She was drunk at the time. Seok-bin thought that his mother was like that because he met Mi-sol, but Jung-ja told Seok-bin to do whatever he wanted and not to live so tiredly. Under Seok-bin's questioning, Jung-ja finally told everything. Jung-ja and Seok-bin's father were incapable, so they could only stay at Jin-wook's house. Their daily life was quite comfortable, but in fact, they were torturing themselves to be servants to Mrs. Kang. Jung-ja worked so hard for so many years, just hoping that Seok-bin could become the heir to Mrs. Kang's property. Previously, Jung-ja separated Seok-bin and Mi-sol for this reason, but now everything was over because Mrs. Kang was about to find her grandson. In the end, their family was still just outsiders. At this moment, Seok-bin finally understood that his mother, who had always been against him, had silently sacrificed so much for him. Thinking about how he had lost so many things to get to where he was today, Seok-bin could not accept giving up like that. For his mother and for himself, Seok-bin had to become the heir to Mrs. Kang's property. Mrs. Kang had cancer, but Jung-ja was secretly happy. As long as Mrs. Kang passed away before finding her grandson, Seok-bin could easily inherit all the property. As for Seok-bin, after knowing his mother's heart, he also decided to compete for the position of heir. Through a series of investigations, Seok-bin discovered that the company's director had embezzled public funds. However, he did not report it to Jin-guk, but instead used this to threaten Director Park to join Seok-bin's side. Seok-bin prepared for the future fight for the right to inherit the company. At the same time, Seok-bin also thought that the company's current business model was too conservative, so he wanted to reform it. Director Park is a financial manager, so he can be used. Jung-ja is also not idle. Knowing that Mrs. Kang is seriously ill, Jung-ja is even more diligent. Jung-ja pretends to be heartbroken and tells Mrs. Kang about her condition. Knowing that she is seriously ill, Mrs. Kang immediately panics. She is not afraid of death, but her grandson has not been found yet. Therefore, she cannot die like this. So Mrs. Kang quickly calls to request to speed up the search for her grandson. Even if she has to mobilize thousands of people, she does not hesitate. At this moment, Jung-ja walks in. In Mrs. Kang's bewildered eyes, Jung-ja lees that her dead sister-in-law sister-in-law has appeared to her in a dream. This sister-in-law told Jung-ja to go find her sister-in-law's son. After a period of fabrication, Jung-ja succeeded in bringing her relationship closer to Mrs. Kang. Jung-ja expresses that she will definitely spend the rest of her life looking for that child. On the other side, Mi-sol, through So-dong's introduction, successfully applies for the position of press officer. While Mi-sol was packing her things on the job, her boss saw the documents. The boss said that these were the documents he gave to So-dong. After a while of chatting, Mi-sol learned that So-dong had silently sacrificed a lot for her. While everyone was at work, they went out to eat. They even called So-dong came. After seeing Mi-sol, So-dong seemed very happy, but Mi-sol's friends suddenly picked up food for So-dong. This made So-dong very confused. Afraid that Mi-sol would misunderstand, on the way home, the two talked happily. So-dong couldn't help but compliment Mi-sol. He said that she had a beautiful smile. On the other side, Seok-bin returned home. He heard from his mother that Mrs. Kang was seriously ill. He seemed to have the same plan as his mother, but the next day, Mrs. Kang went to the hospital for a checkup and found out that she was fine. She just needed a regular checkup. Some people were happy, some were sad. Jung-ja seemed a little disappointed, but still pretended to be very happy to congratulate Mrs. Kang on her recovery. At this time, news about Mrs. Road, Kang's grandson, had progressed. This made Jung-ja extremely worried. Jung-ja did not want to sit around waiting for such a failure, so Jung-ja wanted to bribe someone who knew about it, but she had no money. Jung-ja had no choice but to embezzle the living expenses that Jin-guk gave to the family. Jung-ja asked the orphanage manager to report any news to her immediately. The manager agreed immediately after receiving the money. Not only that, Jung-ja also took the initiative to cook medicine for Mrs. Kang but secretly poured the real medicine into the trash. Jung-ja arbitrarily replaced it with some tonic. On the other side, Mi-sol accidentally saw someone pretending to be hit by a car after work. The owner of the car was Yoon-jung. Seeing that Yoon-jung was about to be blackmailed, Mi-sol, with a sense of justice, stood up and exposed those people. Thus, the two resolved their conflict. Yoon-jung even invited Mi-sol to eat together. The two were chatting happily when Yoon-jung received a call from Seok-bin. He said that he would come to pick her up and take her home. Yoon-jung originally wanted to introduce her husband to Mi-sol, but Mi-sol had something to do and had to leave first. In that moment, the two missed each other. Returning to the office, Mi-sol suddenly had a nosebleed. At this moment, So-dong happened to come over. Seeing that, he hurriedly ran out to buy the best tonic for her, but Mi-sol opened it and was very surprised. She couldn't accept this thing worth $1,000,000, so she hurriedly chased after him and said that this gift was too expensive, but So-dong didn't think so. Mi-sol asked So-dong why he treated her so well. So-dong said that he didn't want to see her so tired and exhausted. Then So-dong also said that he liked her. At first, he didn't want to say it this way, but he really liked her. So-dong also said that when he saw Mi-sol crying sadly, he would feel very upset. Mi-sol did not know how to respond for a moment. Looking at So-dong's tense expression, she still refused. Mi-sol said that he was a good person, but she was not ready yet. Even though Mi-sol rejected him, So-dong still hoped that she could take good care of herself. He told her to remember to take her supplements, and then left without looking back. But not long after, he regretted it. He thought that he should not have been so hasty. He did not even prepare a bouquet of flowers. So-dong's father found out that So-dong was in an unusual mood, so he asked him if he had been abandoned by a woman. This made So-dong extremely embarrassed. Seeing So-dong sad, So-dong's father encouraged So-dong that he was a good man, so he would definitely have a happy love. So-dong's father also taught So-dong not to look for a woman who did not like him. But So-dong's father did not know that in So-dong's heart, he only loved Mi-sol. Mi-sol also lost focus when returning to the editorial office. So-dong's confession kept appearing in her mind. But that day when Mi-sol returned home, she discovered that the gift she intended to return to So-dong had been opened and eaten. The culprit was her uncle. Mi-sol felt helpless, so she had no choice but to borrow money from her best friend. So-dong was working when he suddenly received a text message. He thought that Mi-sol had accepted him, so he happily ran over. But So-dong's joy didn't last long before Mi-sol returned the gift to him. This made So-dong extremely disappointed. At this time, he was deeply hurt. He stood up and left sadly. The feelings between the two seemed to be getting more and more complicated. On the other side, Seok-bin, in order to consolidate his position in the company, prepared to eliminate the company's main product. He thought that beef tripe soup was not profitable, but Jin-guk and Mrs. Kang couldn't bear it because everything now was built step by step from selling beef tripe soup. It can be said that this unprofitable product is the origin of the corporation. But for the benefit of the whole company, Mrs. Kang decided to let all the employees vote. But when Seok-bin told the employees to agree with this decision, So-dong objected. Seeing a small employee disobeying like that, Seok-bin was extremely angry. Seok-bin hated So-dong very much in his heart, but So-dong's mind was not on this matter. He was heartbroken and drank to drown his sorrows. Unexpectedly, So-dong met Mi-sol's uncle, Woo-dong. The two of them felt like they had known each other for a long time. As a result, So-dong drank until he lost consciousness. Helpless, Woo-dong took So-dong home. But the next morning, So-dong was discovered by Dong-un. Dong-un even thought that So-dong was a thief. But after So-dong went out, he discovered that he had slept at Mi-sol's house last night. After a happy breakfast, the two said goodbye to each other on the side of the road. At this time, So-dong still did not know that this boy was Mi-sol's son. On Seok-bin's side, he received a phone call saying that the plan that had been set up had encountered a problem. Because So-dong had raised an objection in the company and received the support of many employees. Mrs. Kang also agreed with So-dong's opinion, so she cancelled Seok-bin's change plan. Seok-bin angrily called So-dong out. He asked why So-dong opposed this plan. Seok-bin showed his anger, but So-dong was not afraid at all. So-dong thought that he was just doing what he should do. So-dong even felt that Seok-bin's reaction was a bit too extreme. Seok-bin immediately threatened that So-dong should be careful with him. Back at the office, So-dong suddenly received a phone call. It turned out that he had left his phone at Mi-sol's house, so Mi-sol went to the company gate to return it to him. So-dong excitedly ran out, but slipped and hugged Mi-sol. This scene was accidentally seen by Seok-bin, who was passing by, but at this time, Seok-bin could only suppress the anger in his heart. As for Mi-sol and So-dong, because of this unexpected hug, their relationship had a little progress. The two talked and laughed happily in the beverage shop, but they didn't know that Seok-bin's eyes were staring at them. His ex-girlfriend had a new boyfriend, which Seok-bin couldn't accept. After So-dong left, Seok-bin immediately ran to pull Mi-sol back and asked why she didn't wait for him. But Mi-sol's heart was deeply hurt by Seok-bin. She asked why she had to wait for him, and then she turned around and left. At Mi-sol's house, Woo-dong was bored playing with Dong-eun. He suddenly remembered something. It turned out to be calling So-dong. Woo-dong invited So-dong to come over to house to play so he could have dinner with Mi-sol. So-dong was extremely excited, so he quickly went to the market to shop. It seemed like this was the most important thing to him. He hurried to Mi-sol's house and started washing vegetables and cooking rice. Woo-dong seemed to know something, so he called Mi-sol and lied that Dong-eun was crying. Dong-eun wanted to eat Mi-sol's cooking, so he told her to come home early. Hearing that, So-dong was even happier. He couldn't help but exclaim that Woo-dong was really good at working. But after Mi-sol returned home, she found out that So-dong was also there. After the surprise, it was mainly embarrassment. While eating, So-dong took the initiative to tell everyone a joke. Mi-sol was a little embarrassed because this was a joke that So-dong told her. She used it to comfort her child. But So-dong was very happy, feeling that the two of them had more topics to talk about and that it was different from everyone's happy laughter. Seok-bin's face became gloomy. Remembering the scenes he saw in the morning, he couldn't bear this anger. So he drove to Mi-sol's front door and called Mi-sol, but no one answered. At this time, Mi-sol and So-dong left the house together. When they said goodbye, the two talked and laughed happily. As soon as So-dong left, Seok-bin immediately rushed out. He questioned Mi-sol about their relationship. He even said that So-dong was someone who always ruined other people's good things. Mi-sol immediately became angry. She said that who she met had nothing to do with him. As for So-dong, he was very happy as soon as he left. He felt that he still had hope, but suddenly he discovered that he forgot to pick up his things, so he hurriedly turned back. At this time, Seok-bin was still angry with Mi-sol. Mi-sol didn't want to care much. At this time, So-dong rushed to protect Mi-sol from behind. Seok-bin couldn't help but punch So-dong straight in the face. Seok-bin wanted Mi-sol to give him a little more time, but Seok-bin was mocked by Mi-sol that So-dong was 1,000 times better than him. Looking at the backs of the two leaving together, Seok-bin was extremely angry. On this side, So-dong was beaten until bleeding by Seok-bin, making Mi-sol extremely guilty. She felt that it was because of her that So-dong was hurt. At this time, So-dong asked why Seok-bin kept staring at Mi-sol. Mi-sol stammered that they were friends before. So-dong felt even more strange. If they were just normal friends in the past, interfering in someone else's life like that would be too much. But how could he know that their relationship before was not simple? After returning home, Mi-sol was very hesitant. One was the man she used to love, but he hurt her deeply. The other was the boy who always protected her and always thought of her. She didn't know what to do. On the other hand, So-dong's objection vote helped Mrs. Khan protect the beef soup left by her husband. She liked this very much, so she let her son-in-law promote So-dong. So-dong was promoted to the secretary department. Now it was good. Every plan that Seok-bin reported to Jin-guk had to go through So-dong's hands. Seeing So-dong successful in both love and career, Seok-bin immediately called him back. Although they didn't like each other, out of politeness, So-dong still bowed to Seok-bin. But in return, Seok-bin threatened. Seok-bin said that if So-dong interfered in his business again, the consequences would be dire. So-dong was not afraid at all and affirmed that Mi-sol was the woman he liked. So-dong also reminded Seok-bin that men shouldn't use their fists carelessly, otherwise the only one who would suffer would be him. Today, when Mi-sol was delivering newspapers, she suddenly stopped. Looking at the clothing store in front of her, she remembered that So-dong was punched by Seok-bin last night because of her. His shirt was also ruined. Feeling that she should do something for So-dong, Mi-sol went into the clothing store to choose a shirt, but she didn't know So-dong's measurements, so she could only estimate. Then, So-dong's phone rang while he was working. Seeing that it was Mi-sol calling, he immediately became motivated. So-dong hurriedly ran out to meet Mi-sol. As soon as Mi-sol gave him the shirt, So-dong was very surprised. The woman he liked actually gave him a gift. This relationship was really a big step forward. After returning home, So-dong quickly changed into the shirt that Mi-sol gave him. So-dong was accidentally seen by his mother. So-dong could only say that it was a gift from someone else, when he immediately thought that it must have been given by the girl So-dong liked. This made So-dong very embarrassed. Looking at the shirt on his body, he even specifically told his mother to dry clean it. It could be seen how much So-dong cared about Mi-sol. The next day, he even deliberately sent a photo to Mi-sol Sol, saying that he really liked the gift. So-dong's happy expression was accidentally seen by Seok-bin. Seok-bin was heartbroken, so he could only drink to drown his sorrows. When he got home, he complained to his mother. He said that there was no meaning to living in this world. Seok-bin was not satisfied in both love and career, therefore he gradually became crazy. He also said that it would be best if Mrs. Kang's grandson died. This made Jung-ja extremely scared. When Jung-ja went to bed at night, she remembered what her son said. Jung-ja decided not to hesitate anymore. The next day, when she made medicine for Mrs. Kang, Jung-ja really put in a mysterious medicine. Then she stirred it well and then worriedly gave it to Mrs. Kang. Mrs. Kang drank it all without any caution. Jung-ja was extremely happy, but in her heart she was calculating the time it would take for the medicine to take effect. No matter what, she had to turn the entire conglomerate into Seok-bin's. At this time, Mrs. Kang suddenly had a stomachache, so Jung-ja pretended to care and helped her to the bathroom. This made Jung-ja extremely happy. Then Jung-ja put laxatives in the fruit juice. Jung-ja wanted Mrs. Kang to not be able to leave the room. Only then would Jung-ja personally go to see the manager at the orphanage. Jung-ja was the first to grasp Mrs. Kang's grandson's movements. But when Jung-ja arrived, she discovered that the manager was actually a fraud. He had no idea where Mrs. Kang's grandson was. Jung-ja had recorded the entire process and used this to threaten the manager to cooperate with her in acting. They also found a middle-aged woman, so that the two of them would lie that when they saw the child that year, the child had no signs of life. Then they would pay them 20 million in compensation. Unexpectedly, when Mrs. Kang knew that her grandson was gone, she fainted. Upon hearing the news, Jin-guk and Seok-bin rushed to the hospital. When Seok-bin was about to call Yoon-jung, he suddenly discovered his mother and hurriedly left. After thinking for a while, he followed. Jung-ja didn't know anything, so she looked for the manager. Jung-ja also asked him to leave immediately. She also said that if there was any news about Mrs. Kang's grandson, he had to contact her immediately, so he will receive a large sum of money. But the secret transaction between the two was seen by Seok-bin. How will Seok-bin deal with his mother's immoral actions? Seeing that Mi-sol is about to take the TV station exam, So-dong gave her a gift. He also said that this pocket watch is a lucky charm that he has passed many exams with. He also told Mi-sol to wear it when taking the exam. It can bless her to pass the exam. She also thanked So-dong very much. But the next day when she was about to go out to take the exam, Mi-sol discovered that her mother was seriously ill. Sun-ah was lying on the bed in cold sweat. Even so, Sun-ah still let Mi-sol take the exam. Sun-ah said that Mi-sol did not need to worry about her. So-dong passed by again. When he saw Mi-sol, he rushed over. At this time, Mi-sol was extremely happy to see So-dong. Then, with So-dong's help, they took Sun-ah to the hospital. After the examination, the doctor said that Sun-ah only needed surgery. So-dong let Mi-sol take the exam first, while he stayed here to take care of her mother. Before Mi-sol went to the exam, he did not forget to encourage her. After 2 hours of the exam, Mi-sol returned to the hospital. Seeing So-dong taking good care of Dong-moon, Mi-sol seemed to feel like a family of three. When she arrived at the hospital room, Sun-ah looked at her daughter and So-dong and felt that they were quite compatible. Until So-dong left, Mi-sol's smile did not stop. On the other side, Seok-bin discovered that his mother had done something bad, so he went to a bar alone to drink to relieve his sorrow. He was originally shameless, but suddenly remembered what his mother said, that it was all for him. He gradually understood his mother's way of doing things. He also wanted to take over this conglomerate, so he called Yoon-jung to go visit Mrs. Kang and hoped to quickly gain her trust. But as soon as Seok-bin went out to answer the phone, he saw Mi-sol's son. At this time, he did not know that the boy in front of him was his and Mi-sol's son 7 years ago. But Mi-sol happened to see it. Then Mi-sol hurriedly pulled Dong-moon and ran away. Seeing the sister so nervous, Dong-moon curiously asked what was wrong, but Mi-sol couldn't tell him the truth. That day, Mi-sol's best friend asked her out to dinner after work, but Mi-sol said that she had an appointment with So-dong. Mi-sol's best friend suspected that the two were in love, but she didn't have any evidence, so she insisted that Mi-sol take her along. Mi-sol reluctantly agreed. This made So-dong miserable. At first, he was very excited to go on a date, but when he arrived at the restaurant, another person appeared. This surprised him. Mi-sol was also a little embarrassed. Suddenly, there was another funny person on their date. So-dong thought that Mi-sol was shy about dating him alone, so he decided that the two of them should just be friends first. He didn't want to put too much pressure on Mi-sol. Seeing So-dong so thoughtful made Mi-sol very happy. Then, she gave the pocket watch to So-dong, but So-dong put it directly around her neck. At this moment, Mi-sol was truly moved by this man. Even when So-dong talked to her, she was a little unable to react and hurriedly ran home. Mi-sol tried to calm down. She wondered what was wrong with her. How could she be moved by So-dong? But no matter how hard she tried to control herself, the fact that she was moved by So-dong was undeniable. On the other side, Mrs. Khan seemed much calmer after waking up. Knowing that her grandson was gone, she went to the funeral home to visit her daughter. She hoped that her daughter and grandson could reunite in heaven. This could be considered as resolving a concern. Jung-ja, who was walking behind, suddenly had a plan. In order to gain Mrs. Khan's trust, Jung-ja told Seok-bin to quickly give birth. Then Jin-guk adopted the child. The purpose was for Seok-bin to inherit the entire conglomerate. But when he heard his mother's unreasonable words, Seok-bin agreed. But how to convince Yoon-jung? Jung-ja did not ask directly, but first went shopping with Yoon-jung. Then, while eating, Jung-ja found an opportunity to ask if the two had had any safety measures. But Yoonjung was not a spineless person. She directly refused to answer. She thought that even a mother-in-law should not ask about their private matters. After asking many times without results, Yoonja finally explained the reason to Yoonjung. It was all for Seokbin's future. But Yoonjung still refused. Yoonjung thought that she was not a tool to give birth. Jungja angrily poured makeup directly on Yoonjung's head. Yoonjung could not believe it. The always gentle mother-in-law now treated her like this. Yoonjung had no choice but to run to the company to find Seokbin to tell him everything. But Seokbin said that if she didn't help him, he wouldn't talk to her anymore. He also didn't want to continue to be with her. Such heartless words surprised Yoonjung. Yoonjung couldn't believe that the man she loved deeply would threaten her just to gain Jin-guk's trust. On the other side, the relationship between So-dong and Mi-sol was progressing. They went to the movies together, occasionally having intimate gestures. When seeing the scene of the couple kissing in the movie, So-dong couldn't help but think that it would be great if he had such a relationship with Mi-sol. Unexpectedly, after they finished watching the movie, it started to rain heavily. Coincidentally, when they went to buy an umbrella, there was only one left. Although Mi-sol was a bit shy, she still had to share an umbrella with So-dong. So-dong was very thoughtful. Because he didn't want Mi-sol to get wet, he got half of his body wet. Looking at the beauty in So-dong's arms, he could no longer control his feelings. He kissed her directly. Mi-sol was not angry at all, but secretly happy. Then she ran away. After getting on the bus, she felt that she should let go of everything in the past. The next day, So-dong asked Mi-sol out. He didn't want them to be just friends. He had always been unconsciously concerned about Mi-sol, so he directly confessed to her. He asked her if she would accept his feelings. He also told Mi-sol to reply before 12 o'clock tonight. Mi-sol stayed quietly in her room that night. She raised her head to look at the wall clock. It was less than 5 minutes until 12 o'clock. Her mind still echoed with So-dong's words today. She thought a lot. Mi-sol picked up her phone and prepared to text So-dong back. But then she thought again and stopped. A person with a child like her would never have the courage to continue loving. At the same time, So-dong was also quietly waiting. He didn't know what outcome he would face. He looked at the appointment time that had passed, but there was still no response from his phone. But the next day, So-dong was still full of hope. He smiled sincerely and told Mi-sol not to be too stressed. Then he took out a coin and said that there were two options. One was to continue dating 10 times. The other was that Mi-sol could say anything. But Mi-sol didn't know that in fact, the two sides of this coin were the same. So So-dong successfully got the opportunity to continue dating 10 times with Mi-sol. Without waiting for Mi-sol to say anything, So-dong hurriedly left, leaving Mi-sol with a bewildered expression. In order to bring Mi-sol the best dating experience, So-dong had specially learned from his colleagues' experiences. He made a lot of delicious food for Mi-sol. Unexpectedly, Mi-sol was eagerly waiting. When she received So-dong's call, she felt like she was in a new relationship. But when the two were happily dating, something big happened to Seokbin. Jin-guk brought Dongwon home again and scared Jungja to collapse. Because this child is Seokbin's son with his first love 7 years ago. For the sake of her son's future, Jungja had the heart to separate them. But now this child was brought home by Jin-guk. Even Mrs. Khan loves Dongwon very much. As soon as Jin-guk brought the child home, Jungja secretly followed. She discovered that Jin-guk was very close to Sun-ah. She secretly thought that if they developed feelings, it would be extremely disadvantageous for Seokbin. So Jungja insisted on letting Yoonjung get pregnant. She bought a lot of supplements and told Yoonjung to take them on time. Yoonjung pretended to agree, but when she turned her back, she poured them all into the toilet. She is not someone who can be easy follow the ordered by others. At the same time, So-dong and Mi-sol had a new development. Mi-sol originally planned to take her child to play in the water, but So-dong found out, so he decided to make this his third date with Mi-sol. And after Sun-ah found out about this, she felt that after so many years, Mi-sol should really find a new boyfriend. But unfortunately, Seokbin and Yoonjung also came to the water park. Just as So-dong and Mi-sol were having fun, Seokbin saw everything. His ex-lover now had a boyfriend, but for the sake of the future, he did nothing. In the evening, So-dong carried Donggun and took Mi-sol home. Mi-sol behind him seemed to have something on her mind. Maybe the man in front of her was really suitable for her. Moreover, Sun-ah also found So-dong very good and she really liked him. At this time, Mi-sol also told her mother that she really liked So-dong. But So-dong didn't know that Dongmun was Mi-sol's son. Looking at the pocket watch that So-dong gave Mi-sol, she hesitated, but in the end, she decided to tell the truth. So-dong was shocked after hearing the news. He couldn't believe what he had just heard. At this moment, Mi-sol's eyes were filled with tears. She loved So-dong very much, but could not accept his proposal. After leaving, Mi-sol could only cry alone. After many years of living in misery, when love came, she could not bravely accept it. So-dong was also very miserable. He loved Mi-sol very much, but could not accept the fact that she had a child. He got drunk alone. On the way home, he was beaten by some thugs. At this time, a man walked over. It was Seokbin, and these thugs were sent by Seokbin. Seokbin warned So-dong that Mi-sol was his woman. So-dong had better not go too far. Unexpectedly, So-dong suddenly laughed out loud. This action left Seokbin bewildered, not knowing what was wrong with So-dong. The next day, Sun-ah wanted to invite So-dong to her house to play, but was stopped by Mi-sol. Under her mother's constant questioning, Mi-sol finally confessed that she had told So-dong everything. Mi-sol's mother also began to worry about why her daughter's fate was so miserable. On the way to work, Mi-sol's heart was filled with thoughts. In her mind appeared the beautiful moments with So-dong. The warm moments of the past were still deeply imprinted in her mind, but now the two of them were entering into suffering. So-dong could not accept it, so he went to Mi-sol again, but the result was still hard for him to accept. Mi-sol gave birth to a baby when she was in 12th grade, and the father of the child was Seok-bin. After hearing that, So-dong seemed to be in despair. He asked Mi-sol why she treated him like that. He could not accept someone else's child and could never understand. Even if she scolded him for being selfish, he would accept it. Mi-sol was heartbroken. The radiant boy before had become like this because of her. When Seok-bin heard the news of the two breaking up, he had a plan for the future. That day, when she went to work, Mi-sol received a basket of flowers. Mi-sol thought it was So-dong's gift, so she was a little happy. Unexpectedly, when Mi-sol opened the flower, the person who gave her the flowers was Seok-bin. Then the two met. Seok-bin wanted to give Mi-sol a necklace, but she flatly refused. Seok-bin didn't willing like that, so he chased after her. Unexpectedly, Seok-bin met Yoon-jung. Yoon-jung immediately called Seok-bin her husband. This sentence made Seok-bin's face change color immediately. He also said that it was an honor to meet Mi-sol. Mi-sol couldn't believe how he could be so fake. At that time, Yoon-jung still didn't know that Mi-sol was Seok-bin's first love in high school. She even enthusiastically invited Mi-sol to eat together. Mi-sol had no choice but to find an excuse to leave. On the other side, Jung-jae was trusted by Mrs. Kang, so her life began to be prosperous. Jung-jae used to be very stingy, but now she started spending a lot of money on fashion stores. This made her best friend criticize her. But when Jung-jae was showing off, she accidentally saw Jin-guk. Then Jung-jae quickly found an excuse to leave. Jung-jae secretly followed Jin-guk and Do-moon. Jung-jae accidentally discovered that Jin-guk and Suna had an unusual relationship. Realizing that something was wrong, Jung-jae hurriedly returned home. Jung-jae thought to herself that if Jin-guk and Suna got married, the inheritance of the conglomerate would have nothing to do with Seok-bin. Moreover, the hard-won plan of many years would be in vain. Jung-jae absolutely could not let the two of them get together, so Jung-jae told Mrs. Kang that her son-in-law had a new lover, but that woman had bad intentions. That woman intentionally approached Jin-guk just to divide the assets. Hearing Jung-jae's vague words, Mrs. Kang was still a little skeptical, but when Mrs. Kang saw the two of them being intimate with her own eyes, she finally believed Jung-jae. So Mrs. Kang called Jin-guk to ask what he was doing. Jin-guk was temporarily unable to explain clearly to his mother-in-law, so he could only say that he was working. Mrs. Kang was very surprised when she heard that. Her always honest son-in-law had now started lying to her. It wasn't that Mrs. Kang didn't want her son-in-law to remarry, but she was worried that the woman had other intentions. With Jung-jae's instigation, Mrs. Kang decided to take action herself. Mrs. Kang called Suna to her house because she wanted to eat kimchi made by Suna. Mrs. Kang gave Suna some money and asked Suna to work as a maid in her house. The other intention was to let Suna know the difference in status. Just when Suna didn't know how to refuse, Jin-guk suddenly returned home. Seeing the woman he liked being insulted, he directly held Suna's hand. When his mother-in-law questioned him, Jin-guk immediately told her to be polite to Suna because Suna was the woman he loved. Jin-guk then said that he would marry Suna. If Mrs. Kang didn't agree, he wouldn't regret leaving the house. But Jin-guk's actions made Mrs. Kang very angry. For several days, Mrs. Kang didn't eat or drink. Suna, knowing the situation, personally made a sumptuous meal and went to see Mrs. Kang with Jin-guk. It seemed that she remembered that her son-in-law had taken care of her for many years, or maybe she was touched by Suna's sincerity, so Mrs. Kang temporarily stopped trying to stop them. Meanwhile, So-dong was drinking to drown his sorrows over Mi-sol's matter. At this moment, Mi-sol and her colleague came home from work and accidentally saw each other. Set up by her colleague, Mi-sol stayed. She was heartbroken when she saw So-dong now. So-dong seemed to still not be able to escape the pain. He left drunk, but when he crossed the street, a car rushing towards him. Mi-sol saw this and ran out without caring about the danger. At this time, So-dong also sobered up. He was worried that Mi-sol would be hurt. It was obvious that they loved each other, but they did not have the courage to be together. As soon as Mi-sol turned around to leave, So-dong hugged her directly. He seemed to be going crazy because of Mi-sol. Unexpectedly, after Mi-sol left, So-dong met his father. Dad seemed to know So-dong's thoughts. Dad told So-dong that if he loved, he should be brave to love. Don't let yourself regret. Dad's words made So-dong enlightened. The next morning, So-dong went straight to Mi-sol's workplace and pulled her out. He said that after knowing the truth, he was very sad. But not seeing Mi-sol made him even more sad. His heart couldn't leave Mi-sol. After Mi-sol agreed, So-dong hugged Mi-sol tightly. After many difficulties, the two finally came together. Then So-dong took out a ring and gently put it on Mi-sol's hand. On the other side, Yoon-jung went to the company to find Seok-bin and discovered the necklace Seok-bin intended to give Mi-sol. She didn't know anything and thought Seok-bin bought it for her. Seok-bin couldn't explain, so he just put it on Yoon-jung. But unexpectedly, when Mi-sol got off work, Yoon-jung invited her out for coffee. Yoon-jung also showed Mi-sol the necklace her husband bought for her. Mi-sol could only shyly say that it was so beautiful. At this time, Seok-bin walked in. In addition to being surprised, he discovered the ring on Mi-sol's hand, so he secretly followed Mi-sol. Seok-bin saw So-dong and Mi-sol happily playing with a child. He was upset, so he got drunk again. Yoon-jung curiously picked up Seok-bin's phone, but discovered a photo of Mi-sol. She seemed to know something, so she was very angry. The next day, she asked Mi-sol out. Mi-sol still thought it was just a simple meal. Unexpectedly, Seok-bin was also also called here. Seeing Mi-sol, Seok-bin was clearly startled, but he could only try to smile and pretend not to know Mi-sol. Mi-sol was uncomfortable, so she wanted to find a reason to leave, but was held back by Yoon-jung. She showed Mi-sol a photo. Mi-sol was extremely shocked. She didn't know how her photo was in Seok-bin's phone. As for Yoon-jung, her expression gradually became fierce. She asked what their relationship was. Seok-bin hurriedly explained. Mi-sol was also panicked. She didn't want Yoon-jung to misunderstand, but Yoon-jung didn't listen and directly splashed wine on Mi-sol's face. At this time, Seok-bin angrily asked Yoon-jung why she secretly looked at his phone, but in the end, Yoon-jung angrily slapped him. She said that she would absolutely not forgive the two of them. After Yoon-jung left, Mi-sol blamed Seok-bin for doing that. Wasn't he making her suffer enough? At this time, Seok-bin was extremely embarrassed. As for Mi-sol, because So-dong was by her side, she quickly forgot about this sadness. She focused on preparing for the TV interview, but Mi-sol didn't know that Yoon-jung secretly hated her. What's even more unfortunate was that Mi-sol's interviewer was Yoon-jung. In order to get revenge on Mi-sol, Yoon-jung secretly changed Mi-sol's speech into a blank piece of paper. Unexpectedly, Mi-sol thought this was just a challenge. Then, Mi-sol relied on her improvisational skills to win the recognition of the main judge. But in the second actual evaluation, Yoon-jung sent someone to ruin Mi-sol's plan. Mi-sol hurriedly looked for scrap paper, but was arranged by Yoon-jung in advance. With no other choice, Mi-sol helplessly tore her shirt and completed the evaluation task when time was running out. She thought everything would be fine, but unexpectedly, Mrs. Kang came to visit today. But Mrs. Kang discovered that there was a strange man in Mi-sol's house. This man claimed to be Dong-eun's father and criticized Sun-ah for being inhumane. Sun-ah wanted to abandon him and follow someone else. This scared Mrs. Kang to the point of fainting, but it was Jung-ja who wanted to prevent Jin-guk from getting married. Jung-ja sent someone to do this. After returning home, Mi-sol quickly learned everything. For her mother's happiness, Mi-sol decided to come to clarify the truth, but Mi-sol was deliberately rejected by Jung-ja and did not let her in. Unexpectedly, the maid just went out and accidentally let Mi-sol in. Jung-ja was scared and quickly stopped them, but the argument between the two attracted everyone's attention. Mi-sol immediately knelt down and said everything. She said that Dong-eun was not her mother's son, but her son born when she was still in high school. At the same time, Mi-sol explained that her mother pretended to be Dong-eun's mother because of her reputation. After knowing everything, Mrs. Kang immediately respected Sun-ah. Also a mother, Mrs. Kang had the heart to abandon her own grandson because of her reputation, which now made her extremely regretful. Meanwhile, Sun-ah did something she did not have the courage to do. Therefore, Mrs. Kang agreed to let Jin-guk and Sun-ah continue to date. Today, Mrs. Kang invited Mi-sol's family to a party while Dong-eun was playing outside when Seok-bin, who had just returned home, saw him. The inexplicable feeling of intimacy made the two hug each other. At this time, he did not know that the boy in front of him was his son. Dong-eun went into the living room and scared Jung-ja very much. Seok-bin witnessed everything and seemed to have discovered something. Returning to the room, Seok-bin questioned his mother if the boy was Mi-sol's son. But Jung-ja did not want Seok-bin to know the truth, so she lied that it was Sun-ah's child. But Sun-ah found Seok-bin. She did not know that Seok-bin was the man who hurt her daughter. She wanted Seok-bin to keep the secret that Mi-sol had a child. Seok-bin was extremely stunned. At this moment, he finally knew that 7 years ago, Mi-sol did not have an abortion. The boy he met several times was his son. So Seok-bin went to Mi-sol and shouted at her why she treated him like that. It was obvious that he had a child, but she did not let them meet. Mi-sol cried and said that when she suffered so much and was tortured by his mother, where was he? He gave up, so why does he want to take it back now? Seok-bin finally learned that his mother had lied to him. After returning home, he had a big fight with his mother. Seok-bin said that if his mother hadn't ruined it, he wouldn't be in this situation now. The son who had been considered her hope since childhood yelled at her, making Jung-ja feel very uncomfortable. According to Jung-ja, everything she did was for Seok-bin's future. After knowing that Dong-eun was his son, Seok-bin deliberately bought toys for the boy, but he was invited to his house by Sun-ah, who didn't know about it. In order to avoid Mi-sol feeling embarrassed when she returned, Seok-bin prepared to leave, but Seok-bin was held back by Dong-eun. Seok-bin lovingly taught the boy to assemble the toy. Unexpectedly, So-dong and Mi-sol entered at this time. The atmosphere immediately became tense. The two men met again in this situation, but both endured for fear of disturbing Mi-sol's family. When they left, the two of them confronted each other again. In response to Seok-bin's threat, So-dong did not give in and said that he would always protect Mi-sol. Just when their relationship was in turmoil, the orphanage manager found the person who took away Mrs. Kang's grandson that year. The manager quickly called Jung-ja, but she had a lot of worries. She thought that the manager wanted to cheat her of her money again, so she didn't pay attention. This woman was Mrs. So-dong's classmate. This woman even came to So-dong's house as a guest. Unexpectedly, when Eun-hee saw this woman, her expression suddenly changed. Eun-hee realized that the son she had painstakingly raised for 30 years would most likely be taken away by someone else. Because So-dong was not Eun-hee's biological son, but the couple had adopted him from a woman 30 years ago. According to that woman, although the child was abandoned from the luxurious cradle at that time, it could be seen that this was a wealthy family abandoning the child, maybe because they had something hard to say. After Eun-hee adopted So-dong, she intentionally moved to a strange place to avoid trouble, and let So-dong become her biological son, living the life of a a normal person. But now it seems like someone is looking for that child. This makes In-hee extremely scared. If she loses So-dong, In-hee doesn't know how to live. As for So-dong, he doesn't know anything. He is in love, so his mind is only thinking about Mi-sol. Even though Mi-sol has a 7-year-old child, it can't stop his love for her. But today, Seok-bin came to Mi-sol. Seok-bin said that if Mi-sol doesn't have feelings for him, he can give up. But the child is his child, and this is an unchangeable truth. Seok-bin hopes that Mi-sol will prevent her mother from marrying Jin-guk, because if Sun-ah and Jin-guk become a family, the child's relationship will become extremely complicated. But Mi-sol didn't care about these things. Her mother had finally found her happiness, so she wouldn't let anyone stop her. Unsuccessful in persuading Mi-sol, Seok-bin had to use the name of filial piety to Mrs. Kang to persuade Jin-guk to give up. In fact, Seok-bin was afraid that his position would be shaken. As a result, Jin-guk scolded him for not interfering in things that shouldn't be done. Seeing this, Jun-ja also knew that she could only find an opportunity from Mrs. Kang. It just so happened that day that Jin-guk brought Sun-ah to the suburban villa, creating an opportunity for her. Because this villa was built by Mrs. Kang in memory of her dead daughter. After being provoked by Jung-ja, Mrs. Kang felt that her son-in-law did not respect her daughter. So Mrs. Kang said a few words to Jin-guk. Mrs. Kang did not want Mi-sol's whole family to move here to live. Jin-guk could not give up Sun-ah, so he decided to move out himself. This made it difficult for Mrs. Kang because she had long considered Jin-wook as her son. In the end, Mrs. Kang had no choice but to let Mi-sol's family move in. Jin-guk was so moved that he chose a diamond ring for Sun-ah that night. This moment became eternal for them. But the next day, Mrs. Kang called Sun-ah and presented an agreement. Mrs. Kang said that she did not object to them being together, but Sun-ah had to promise that they would only hold a wedding and not register their marriage. Sun-ah would not participate in any of the group's work in the future. To put it bluntly, Mrs. Kang was afraid that Sun-ah had other intentions. Faced with such humiliation, Sun-ah still signed the agreement because she loved Jin-guk. Sun-ah originally did not plan anything, but after walking out the door, Sun-ah was still very upset. Remembering Mrs. Kang's harsh words, Sun-ah did not know what she would have to face in the future. Looking at the diamond ring her boyfriend gave her, she still decided to bravely pursue her happiness. Jung-ja saw that this was not good, so she had to quickly break up Jin-guk's marriage. So Jung-ja asked Mrs. Kang about the situation, but Mrs. Kang did not want to reveal the agreement, so she refused Jung-ja. Mrs. Kang even praised her son-in-law for finding a good woman. This made Jung-ja very suspicious. Mrs. Kang had always disagreed with this marriage, but she said such words. Jung-ja hurriedly went to Yoonjung. Jung-ja told her and Seok-bin to quickly have a child so that they could maintain their status in this family. But strangely, the couple always wanted to have a child but could not get pregnant. This made Jung-ja wonder if there was something wrong with their bodies. Jung-ja told the two of them to go to the hospital for a checkup, but when Yoonjung arrived at the hospital, she found that Seok-bin had not arrived yet. So she called Seok-bin, but he said that there was nothing wrong with him. He told Yoonjung to go get a checkup first and that he would come in a few days. Yoonjung had no choice but to go alone. As soon as she finished her health check and went out, she received a phone call from a man. He was Yoonjung's friend in America. This time, he happened to come here for a business trip, so he wanted to meet Yoonjung. He made an appointment to meet Yoonjung at the hotel the next day. From Yoonjung's expression, it could be seen that the relationship between the two was definitely not simple. So Mi-sol and So-dong's relationship had entered an orbit. Every day, they were immersed in sweet love. Jin-guk saw it and had to exclaim that youth was wonderful. Then he went to find Sun-ah and said that he also wanted to be hugged and loved. While the two were cuddling, Woo-dong walked in at the wrong time, causing the two to quickly sit up straight, as if they were discovered on a date. That night, Jung-ja was discussing countermeasures with Yoonjung when she unexpectedly walked in. Mrs. Kang said she came to see the house and told them to clean up quickly. Jin-guk's wedding room would be located here. Yoonjung was very surprised because this was her and Seok-bin's room. Now Mrs. Kang told them to move out, which was unacceptable. Jung-ja was also very angry. She didn't understand why Mrs. Kang treated Seok-bin like that. The more she thought about it, the angrier she got, so her whole family to move out. But she couldn't accept it, so Jung-ja decided that if she couldn't have it, she would destroy it. So when no one was around, Jung-ja put laxatives in Mrs. Kang's bowl. But unexpectedly during the meal, Jung-ja's gluttonous husband switched bowls. As a result, Jung-ja's unfortunate husband had to go to the bathroom all day. Jung-ja couldn't believe that her plan would be accidentally ruined by her husband. On the other side, Mi-sol went to work at the TV station and was not comfortable. Yoonjung, using the name of a senior, ordered Mi-sol. Although she really didn't want to, for the sake of her dream, Mi-sol still chose to endure. Unexpectedly, Mi-sol received a call from Seok-bin at this time. He said he wanted to see her. Mi-sol didn't want to pay attention, but Seok-bin used her mother to threaten her. She had no choice but to agree to meet, but she was discovered by Yoonjung. Yoonjung was extremely angry. The remaining reason made Yoonjung call Seok-bin to know what was going on. But at this time, Seok-bin said that he was at the office. Such an obvious lie destroyed Yoonjung's last bit of hope. At this time, the man from America asked her to meet. Yoonjung was angry, so she agreed immediately. After sobering up, Yoonjung realized her mistake. She also told the man not to contact her from now on. But when she got home, she found that Seok-bin was already asleep. She immediately collapsed. She had been out all night, but Seok-bin was her husband, and yet he could sleep so soundly. Yoonjung secretly thought to herself, was she that bad in his heart? Today, Mrs. Kang looked at the agreement Suna had signed and let go of her guard. She felt that as long as she treated her son-in-law sincerely, that was enough. But as soon as Mrs. Kang went out to use the restroom, Jungja sneaked in and saw the agreement on the table. Her face immediately broke into a smile. In this way, Seokbin still had a good chance of inheriting the property. On the other side, Yoonjung treated Mi-sol more and more harshly. She left all the work to Mi-sol do alone. Even on the day of Mi-sol's mother's wedding, she was still working. Finally, Mi-sol finished everything. Mi-sol was about to take a taxi to the wedding when the man in black called Mi-sol over. He claimed that he was Mrs. Kang's messenger to pick Mi-sol up. As soon as Mi-sol got into the car, several thugs surrounded her. They even threatened that if she dared to scream, they would kill her. On this side, Suna finally succeeded in marrying Jin-guk. But as soon as all the guests had arrived, she ran away right before the wedding. She abandoned the man she loved and ran away to a wooden house in the suburbs. It turned out that Mi-sol had been kidnapped and left a note threatening her not to marry that man. Otherwise, they would not spare her daughter. Suna was very scared, remembering that her old best friend had tried everything to prevent her from marrying Jin-guk. Suna thought that it was that best friend who had ruined the marriage, preventing them from getting married for money. Although Suna also longed for her own happiness in order to keep her daughter from being hurt, Suna did not report to the police but chose to hide the matter. Perhaps this was the great motherly love. After returning home, Mi-sol discovered the kidnapper's note. Remembering Seokbin's threats to her, she thought that he was most likely the one who did it, so she asked Seokbin to meet. She questioned whether he did it. The smile on Seokbin's lips immediately made Mi-sol extremely miserable. The ex-lover has now become so crazy. She directly took a glass of wine and threw it in Seokbin's face, but Seokbin did not feel guilty. He told Mi-sol that he would absolutely not let Dongwon live as cousin. He would use any means to prevent this marriage. At this time, Seokbin only had his son in his heart. Jin-guk, who had run away from Suna, was extremely sad. He asked Suna why she did that. Did she have her own suffering? He did not believe that the person he loved would do such a thing for no reason. But Suna could not tell the truth. For the safety of her daughter, she could only apologize. Suna helplessly watched the man she loved leave in pain. She thought that this would be enough to calm things down. But unexpectedly, Yoonjung secretly promoted the matter of this elopement online. After just one night, the whole city knew. Hundreds of reporters blocked Mi-sol's door, making them not dare to go out. Yoonjung even used her superior status to order Mi-sol to interview her mother, or else she have to quit this job. Mi-sol stood helplessly in the middle of the street. She couldn't do that, no matter what. At this moment, Jin-guk suddenly came here. Facing the camera, he put aside his arrogance. He said that he regretted it and pushed all the responsibility onto himself. He also hoped that they wouldn't bother Mi-sol's family. Seeing Jin-guk so infatuated made Suna, who was hiding in the house, unable to hold back her tears. Today, while eating, Yoonjung suddenly vomited. Jungja immediately became happy. She realized something. Jungja quickly took Yoonjung to the hospital for a checkup. Yoonjung was actually 4 weeks pregnant. Seokbin was also very happy when he heard the news. But not long after, Seokbin received a phone call. His expression immediately became dull. Because he had gone to the hospital for a checkup yesterday, the results showed that he was infertile. Then whose child was Yoonjung's? Jungja also felt that something was wrong. After knowing the situation, Jungja personally went to the hospital to ask the doctor. She said that her son had a child before, so it was impossible for him to be infertile. But the doctor told her that Seokbin was probably infertile due to his chaotic private life. After receiving a definite answer from the doctor, Jungja immediately collapsed. The child in Yoonjung's belly was not Seokbin's. In order for her son not to know, she asked the doctor to lie to Seokbin and say that the test was wrong. Knowing that his body was normal, Seokbin smiled again. He was about to be a father. Jungja was very sad. Seeing her son happy because the child was not his, she felt extremely miserable. Was it wrong for her to hide Seokbin for the sake of wealth? Since Yoonjung was pregnant, Mrs. Kang seemed very happy. Mrs. Kang even gave 3% of her shares to Seokbin. This made the whole Seokbin family very excited. They felt that good times were coming. In the evening, when Jin-guk returned home, his body reeked of alcohol, which made Mrs. Kang very sad. She knew that her son-in-law was still sad because of Suna. She told him that Yoonjung was pregnant. Mrs. Kang thought that having an adopted child would cheer Jin-guk up, but Jin-guk was not interested. Looking at the painting in the room that Dongwon gave him, he thought that he would not give up on Suna. On the other side, So-dong and Mi-sol's love story was going very well. So-dong's parents wanted to see Mi-sol this weekend. Mi-sol felt a little uncomfortable when she found out. She didn't dare because of her bad past. But today, Mi-sol accidentally met her high school homeroom teacher again, but she didn't know that the homeroom teacher was So-dong's mother. Hoon-hee also didn't know that the girl in front of her was her son's girlfriend. She also encouraged Mi-sol not to worry about the past and to bravely pursue her happiness. Perhaps the homeroom teacher's words gave Mi-sol courage. Mi-sol agreed to go see So-dong's parents this weekend. This made So-dong very excited. At this time, the hospital manager went to Jungja again and took her to see the woman from that year. After Jungja begged for a long time, Mrs. Kim finally said that the child was still alive. As soon as Jungja asked who it was, Mrs. Kim suddenly looked out into the street and exclaimed that it was him. Jungja also looked at the person who was So-dong. This fact shocked Jungja very much. After going to the hospital to ask, Jungja learned that blood relationships could be determined through fingernails, hair, or chewed gum. So after returning home, Jungja was thinking about how to get these things. She didn't expect that Yoonjung, who was pregnant, wanted to eat potato cakes, so Mrs. Kang immediately ordered Jungja to do it. Jungja looked at Yoonjung and secretly cursed her for being a slut. But to make Mrs. Kang happy, and for her son to inherit the property, she could only endure. As soon as Jungja finished making the potato cake, Yoonjung started complaining that it smelled of oil and was inedible. This made Jungja furious. If the opportunity had not come yet, she would have wanted to kick Yoonjung out of the house a long time ago. That night, Jungja sneaked into Mrs. Kang's room to take a few strands of hair, but unexpectedly, Mrs. Kang woke up. So Jungja had to say that she was afraid that Mrs. Kang would not sleep well, so she came to see. Then Jungja hurriedly left. The next day, Jungja endured the foot odor to massage Mrs. Kang. She took the opportunity to take Mrs. Kang's toenails. While Jungja was happy as if she had found a treasure, she was thinking of a way to take something from Sodong. Unexpectedly, Sodong came to find Mrs. Kang to report the company's business plan. Jungja was extremely happy to give Sodong the chewing gum. When Sodong left, she even saw him off in person. Then Jungja brought it to the hospital for examination DNA. But when Jungja went out, she accidentally saw Sodong holding Misol's child and Misol. That intimate scene startled Jungja. If Sodong was really Mrs. Kang's nephew, Misol's family would most likely become richer than them because of Sodong. Jungja immediately thought of a plan to have someone deliver a letter to Eunhee. Eunhee opened the letter and immediately collapsed. Eunhee could not believe that her son's girlfriend was her pregnant high school student. Eunhee quickly called Sodong and told him to come home, but at that time, Sodong was helping Misol go to an interview outside, so he had absolutely no time to answer his mother's phone call. Today was the day Misol had an appointment to meet Sodong's parents. After carefully putting on makeup, Misol was still a little worried, but Misol could only follow Sodong back to their house. But when Misol saw her homeroom teacher, she was also scared to the point of sweating. Eunhee also kept quiet. When he brought Misol home, Sodong also discovered his girlfriend's abnormality. He thought that his family had done something wrong. On the other side, Seokbin took Yoonjung to the reunion party. He even bragged to his classmates that his wife was pregnant. At this time, a male classmate who had become a doctor suddenly thought of something. After careful consideration, he still called Seokbin back. He said that he had hidden Seokbin's situation because of Jungja's request. The classmate also clearly told Seokbin that he was infertile due to his chaotic sex life. Seokbin could not accept this news when he heard it again. How would he face Yoonjung? Yoonjung questioned her husband why he came home so late, but she ended up getting slapped. Yoonjung still did not know that Seokbin had discovered her secret. Even when Jungja came to advise, Seokbin kicked her out. He was very angry. He was infertile, but Yoonjung was pregnant. Without thinking, he knew he had been betrayed. Seokbin questioned whose child was in her womb. Yoonjung wanted to argue back, but Seokbin said that he was infertile. Yoonjung was stunned when she heard this. She never expected everything to be exposed like this. Seokbin was angry and wanted to kick her out, but Yoonjung cried and begged. She said that she only loved him in her heart. She begged him to give her another chance. Even Jungja came to advise but was scolded by Seokbin. He felt that her should not have deceived him. Yoonjung was not forgiven, so she packed her bags and was about to leave, but was stopped by Jungja. Jungja did not want to keep Yoonjung, but felt that the child in her womb still had value. Jungja wanted to give it to Jin-guk as an adopted son and help Seokbin inherit the conglomerate. Yoonjung was so devastated that she was in despair. She was supposed to become a rich young lady, but ended up in this situation. Seokbin, who was infertile, went to the kindergarten to visit his son. Donghoon also saw Seokbin. The innocent boy ran over and called out brother, but was hugged tightly by Seokbin. At this moment, he just wanted to be the father of a child. He couldn't help but cry. While eating, Jungja changed her previous attitude. Jungja looked down on Yoonjung. Yoonjung made a mistake, so she was obedient. Mrs. Kang didn't know what was going on and thought the food was delicious. At this time, Jungja received the results of the hospital's examination. From the data, it was shown that Sodong was indeed Mrs. Kang's nephew. Unable to accept that many years of effort had been in vain, so Jungja went to Seokbin and told him that Sodong was Mrs. Kang's nephew. Seokbin was very angry when he learned of the situation. He didn't understand why Sodong always opposed him. Women wanted to rob. Even status was fought for. Jealousy overwhelmed hatred for Sodong. Seokbin asked Yoonjung out to meet. He said he wouldn't break up with her. Yoonjung thought Seokbin had forgiven her, but Seokbin said that as long as she agreed to give the child in her belly to Jin-guk to adopt, the two could continue to be together. The meaning of his words was to use the child to make a transaction. Yoonjung angrily disagreed. She called the American man to tell him that she was pregnant, but before Yoonjung could finish, she heard that he was married. Her last hope was shattered. Yoonjung also thought about leaving this world, but she thought again and thought that even if she had to suffer, she wouldn't let others be comfortable. So she went to Seokbin and asked for 3% of the shares in exchange for the child in her belly. For long-term benefits, Seokbin agreed to this condition. When the other side found out that her son's girlfriend was a pregnant high school student, Eunhee could not accept it. Eunhee asked Misol out and told her not to contact Sodong anymore. Eunhee hoped that Misol would stay away from her son. Misol was very sad. She did not know why fate was teasing her like this. She could only sit alone in the cafe and cry. Although Eun-hee could not bear it, for the sake of her son's happiness, she could only be cruel and be a bad person. It was not until late at night that Mi-sol sadly returned home. Sana did not know what to do and asked Mi-sol how she felt about So-dong's parents. Mi-sol did not want her mother to worry, so she could only answer that they liked her very much. Sana was very happy to hear that. Sana thought that Mi-sol had finally found someone she could be with for the rest of her life. Back in the room, So-dong called Mi-sol to ask why her phone was off all day. He was very worried and wanted to know how Mi-sol felt after meeting his parents today. But Mi-sol couldn't tell the truth. She sadly said that they would talk tomorrow. The next day at work, So-dong called on time. He made an appointment to meet Mi-sol and had something to tell her. She touched the ring on her hand, wanting to take it off, but couldn't bear to. But when Mi-sol arrived at the meeting place, she discovered that So-dong had prepared everything. He even stood on stage singing a love song and giving Mi-sol loving words. Mi-sol was very touched by this situation. Then So-dong took out his savings book and said that he would give it to Mi-sol to keep. They saved up to buy a house in the future. He also said that he wanted to have many children with Mi-sol. He even wanted to register Dong-eun's name in their household registration. Mi-sol originally wanted to break up but couldn't say it, so she had no choice but to leave in a hurry. But when she remembered everything that had happened, she didn't want to leave So-dong. Mi-sol asked Eun-hee to go out and kneel down to beg for Eun-hee's consent, but Eun-hee was determined, so she didn't listen. When she got home, Eun-hee told So-dong about Mi-sol's situation. Unexpectedly, So-dong had known for a long time, and he said that no matter what, he had to be with Mi-sol. Eun-hee left helplessly and quietly, but the next day, Eun-hee made her final decision. Eun-hee was determined to divide her son's love. So-dong couldn't understand when he heard that his mother didn't agree to let them be together. Obviously, he could accept Mi-sol's past, but why did his mother stop him? So-dong was sad and argued with his mother and was scolded by her as an ungrateful person who couldn't be raised. At this moment, he only had Mi-sol in his heart. He went downstairs to Mi-sol's house and hugged her tightly. So-dong now knows that his girlfriend has suffered too much alone. He said that no matter what, he will not give up, so he hopes that Mi-sol can overcome the difficulties with him. But Mi-sol pushes So-dong away. She does not want the person she loves to be discriminated against by others because of her. She cries and tells So-dong to take good care of himself in the future and not to come looking for her again. At this time, So-dong is very heartbroken. Unexpectedly, after going through so many difficulties, they were stopped by his mother. At this time, So-dong's family calls Woo-dong and tells him about Mi-sol's story. Woo-dong is extremely surprised, so he quickly goes to his sister to ask if it is true. Knowing that he cannot hide it anymore, Sun A has no choice but to admit it. Woo-dong is immediately stunned. It turns out that Mi-sol went through high school like that. But Woo-dong took the tuition money that his sister prepared for Mi-sol during the most difficult time for his sister and Mi-sol. Now that he think about it, he feel like he really a bad person. On the other side, Yoonjung, after reaching an agreement with Seok-bin, returned to the villa and completely acted as if nothing had happened. Jungja wanted to find an excuse to chase Yoonjung away. Jungja told Yoonjung to go to her aunt's house. But Yoonjung had something very important in her hands, the baby in her belly, so she directly said that she liked it here. Yoonjung was also praised by Mrs. Kang. Mrs. Kang thought that Yoonjung was very good at taking care of the family. When Seok-bin went out to work, Yoonjung prepared a tie for him as usual, but Seok-bin didn't accept it. They couldn't go back to the way they were before. As soon as Seok-bin went to work, Suna came to him again. She said that she wanted to talk to Seok-bin, but after talking for a while, she started crying. After Seok-bin asked Suna, she told him about her daughter's breakup. Hearing this news, Seok-bin's expression was very strange. He didn't know whether he should be happy or sad. Mi-sol was very sad after leaving So-dong. Yoonjung was also difficult and always found reasons to criticize Mi-sol. Yoonjung even blatantly stole the interview opportunity that Mi-sol worked so hard to get. Mi-sol was angry but did not dare to say anything. But when Yoonjung happily went to the interview, she was rejected by the other party. The interviewer said that I would only accept Mi-sol's interview. Yoonjung reluctantly let Mi-sol do the interview. At this time, Yoonjung was extremely angry. When she returned to the TV station, she directly slapped Mi-sol. Yoonjung said that the TV station could only keep one of them. Mi-sol refused to give up, so she decided to fight Yoonjung to the end. Today, when Mi-sol got home from work, So-dong rushed over. He still could not let go of Mi-sol. He hoped that Mi-sol would not give up, but Mi-sol pushed him away and went home by herself. This scene was accidentally seen by Suna. She felt very heartbroken for the two of them. Suna mustered up her courage to ask Yoon-hee out, hoping that she wouldn't separate two people who truly loved each other. But Eun-hee said that she didn't want to do that either. But Mi-sol's matter was noticed by others. Then Eun-hee gave Suna the letter she received that day. Eun-hee said that she didn't want her son to be criticized by others. Suna looked at the threatening letter and seemed to think of something. Suna learned from Jin-guk's detective that the man who impersonated her husband before was Jungja's. Remembering every scene in the past, that ugly face made Suna suspect that the letter in her hand was most likely made by Jungja. Coincidentally, that day Mi-sol went to the kindergarten to pick up her child, but saw Jungja there too. Jungja also said that she wanted to see her nephew so no one else could interfere. Mi-sol was extremely angry. The person who had threatened her to have an abortion could now say such shameless words. The two argued, and Suna accidentally accidentally saw everything. Sun-ah couldn't stand it anymore and rushed in. Jung-ja was beaten mercilessly. Jung-ja knew she was at fault, so when everyone tried to stop, she ran away from there. Sun-ah couldn't stand the stimulation and fainted. After returning home, Sun-ah woke up. Sun-ah blamed Mi-sol for not telling her that Seok-bin was the man who hurt Mi-sol. Mi-sol could only cry and say that when she found out she was pregnant, her mother didn't let her give birth. Moreover, Jung-ja kept threatening her, so she was helpless. Therefore, Mi-sol could only choose to hide everything like that to keep the baby. Mi-sol didn't expect that the person who had tried every way to prevent her from having a child now wanted to take her son away. Sun-ah didn't know what to say about her daughter's concealment. Obviously, as long as she told the truth, everything would turn out as she wanted. But Mi-sol always thought about other people's feelings, and in the end, she was the one who was hurt. But after this incident, Sun-ah finally realized that trying to be patient would only hurt the people she cared about. Thinking about the pain her daughter had to endure, Sun-ah was determined to make those who had harmed her daughter pay. As for Jung-ja, after returning home, her whole body became extremely tense. Jung-ja stood there looking at Mrs. Kang's gentle appearance. But Mrs. Kang would not be able to accept wrongdoings. If Mrs. Kang found out about what Seok-bin had done, not to mention inheriting the property, it would be difficult to even stay in this house. For her son's sake, Jung-ja brought a gift to Sun-ah's door early the next morning, asking for forgiveness. Jung-ja also said that if Sun-ah wanted revenge, Sun-ah should take it out on her and not hurt her son. But Sun-ah didn't care. Mi-sol was her life. Sun-ah went straight to Mrs. Kang's house and said that I had something important to tell you. But when Sun-ah saw Jin-guk, she began to hesitate again. She didn't want the man she loved to be embarrassed, so she changed the subject and told Mrs. Kang something else. Not long ago, Sun-ah left the wedding party in front of everyone, causing shame to the whole family. Sun-ah said that she had her own troubles. Then she showed Mrs. Kang the photos she received on her phone and the threatening note left by the kidnappers. After learning the truth, Mrs. Kang was extremely angry. On one hand, she misunderstood Sun-ah, and on the other hand, this was an act of challenging her dignity. Mrs. Kang then ordered Jin-guk to thoroughly investigate this matter. Jin-guk knew that his girlfriend had suffered many injustices and secretly calculated in his heart. After finding out the truth, he will compensate Sun-ah with a grand wedding. Jung-ja, who was listening outside, breathed a sigh of relief because she didn't do it. But she didn't know that this crazy act was done by her proud son. Seok-bin was extremely panicked after learning about the situation. Meanwhile, So-dong, who didn't want to give up, texted Mi-sol, who was at work. He said that he was waiting for her downstairs. But Eun-hee's objection made Mi-sol afraid to face him. She refused So-dong many times, but secretly looked at him. Seeing So-dong sadly leave, Mi-sol couldn't hold back her tears, but she could only avoid So-dong. That night, So-dong suddenly cheered up. He decided to go home to persuade his mother, but Eun-hee still didn't agree to let them be together. So-dong agitatedly said a few words to his mother and was slapped by his father. They then regretted it because this was the first time they hit So-dong. So-dong ran out in pain. Eun-hee quietly followed behind. Seeing her son so sad, Eun-hee was really heartbroken. Her heart seemed to waver. But the next day, Mi-sol asked Eun-hee out again. After a fierce internal struggle, Mi-sol gave the ring that So-dong gave to Eun-hee. Mi-sol said that if she met So-dong, she wouldn't have the courage to leave him, so she could only return it to So-dong this way. But when So-dong found out, he took the ring back and returned it to Mi-sol. He said that if he couldn't convince his mother tonight, he would agree to break up. So-dong's family was gossiping about this. So-dong's grandmother said bluntly that she wished she hadn't adopted So-dong. But So-dong heard it as soon as he got home. He immediately asked if it was true. He couldn't believe it was true. But So-dong's grandmother, Sarah, told him everything. It turned out that 30 years ago, Eun-hee had an unwanted miscarriage. They accidentally discovered an abandoned baby. At the moment of heartache, Eun-hee saw hope. Then she raised the child to be So-dong. After knowing everything, So-dong was completely desperate and ran alone in the pouring rain. He was already heartbroken because of Mi-sol. Now it was even worse. He didn't know what the future would be like. He didn't even answer his mother's phone. Eun-hee sadly said a few words to Sarah. Unexpectedly, Sarah was angry and left home to go to her best friend's house. The two talked. Mrs. Kim said that Jung-ja had come to find her and wanted to know about So-dong's situation. But Sarah didn't know who Jung-ja was, but only remembered what she looked like. At this time, Mrs. Kim's son suddenly had an urgent matter, so she couldn't continue to receive Sarah. Sarah had no choice but to go to Seok-bin's house to find Mrs. Kang, to ask to stay overnight and tell her about So-dong's argument with his family. Mrs. Kang was also very curious about the reason. Just as Sarah was about to speak, the maid rushed in. It turned out that Yoon-jung's stomach suddenly hurt terribly, afraid that it would affect the baby. Mrs. Kang told Jung-ja to replace the midwife and take Yoon-jung to the hospital. Fortunately, she did not miscarry. But then Yoon-jung said that Jung-ja and Seok-bin did not care about her. Mrs. Kang got angry after hearing that. She severely criticized Seok-bin and Jung-ja. Mrs. Kang then talked to Sarah about her nephew. The two did not know that the person that they said was So-dong. Meanwhile, Jung-ja was afraid that Sun-ah would tell the truth, so she specially bought Sun-ah a beautiful scarf. Unexpectedly, Sun-ah tore it to pieces. Sun-ah also asked Jung-ja and Seok-bin to apologize directly to Mi-sol. Only then did Sun-ah consider forgiving them. When Seok-bin found out, he immediately brought his mother to apologize to Mi-sol. Unexpectedly, he was slapped by Sun-ah. Despite Jung-ja's objection, Seok-bin still knelt down and apologized apologized directly. At this moment, he felt extremely comfortable that he had finally faced his mistakes. Junja was very angry when she saw her son like that. She wanted to say something harsh, but didn't dare. When she got home, Mi-sol hoped that her mother wouldn't take revenge anymore. She didn't want to make her mother suffer because of her. But at this moment, Woo-dong called again. He also said that he heard from his girlfriend that So-dong wasn't In-hee's biological son, and that he had even left home because of this. Mi-sol was immediately worried. So-dong was already sad because of her, and now something like this happened. He must be very desperate. So she quickly contacted So-dong but couldn't get through. Mi-sol searched everywhere but couldn't find any results, so she continued to call. Surprisingly, the person who answered the phone was a stranger. They told Mi-sol that the customer had left his phone, and after asking for the address, Mi-sol went there. Finally, she saw So-dong at the beach. She immediately ran to hug him. The two sat and talked until late at night. So-dong also expressed his feelings. He didn't understand why his biological parents abandoned him. Was it because they were poor, or because they looked down on him? He didn't know under what circumstances they would abandon their children. The next morning, Mi-sol personally went to the kitchen to cook for So-dong. Looking at Mi-sol's busy figure, So-dong thought for a long time. Even though there were many things he couldn't bear, he still chose to leave quietly and only left Mi-sol a few short sentences, saying that when he calmed down, he would come find her. Then In-hee received a text message from her son. So-dong informed her that he was safe. He said that he is going to relieve his emotions. He would come back when he calmed down. He also asked his mother to apologize to his family. After reading the text message, In-hee felt very upset. She knew how tormented So-dong was at the moment, but when she was about to go home, the calm mother called her back. So-dong, with a full beard, returned to her. The suppressed emotions finally erupted. So-dong knew that his mother had sacrificed too much for him, but now he always made her worry. He said that he would go and take care of some things. He would listen to his mother in the future. After saying goodbye to his mother, So-dong waited outside Mi-sol's house. At this moment, Mi-sol came home from work and saw him. She immediately ran over happily and told him about her worries. But So-dong's next words made Mi-sol cry. He directly said, "Break up with her." At this moment, Mi-sol couldn't hold back her tears. Although she realized that they might break up, she didn't expect it to come so quickly and suddenly. Despite Mi-sol's crying, So-dong turned around and left. He was sad, but when he got home, he acted happy. Breaking up with Mi-sol was something that So-dong didn't want at all. But in order to repay his mother for raising him for more than 30 years, he didn't want to make her sad anymore. He could only bear to break up and pretend that nothing happened. His family didn't know what happened and mentioned it. So-dong tried to smile and said that they had broken up. Then he left the table. Un-hee knew that her son was in great pain at the moment. Mi-sol cried until her eyes were red as she returned home. She was extremely heartbroken. At this moment, her mother walked in. Seeing that Mi-sol was not well, Suna hurriedly asked. Mi-sol had no choice but to cry and tell everything. She said that she could understand So-dong's actions, but she could not give up, nor did she want to give up. Suna was heartbroken when she heard this. Suna advised Mi-sol to forget So-dong, but for Mi-sol, when she was in the most pain, So-dong appeared to soothe her pain, so it was hard for her to forget. That evening, Mi-sol went to the beach and looked at the ring So-dong gave her. Her heart could not calm down. Just when she mustered up the courage to throw the ring away, she remembered every moment that had passed. From the time they met, got to know each other, and fell in love. Not knowing when, the two of them had gone through so many things together. Mi-sol hesitated and couldn't bear it. Even when she went out to work, she heard So-dong calling her. But before she could be happy, she realized it was just her illusion. How much must one love someone to be like that? At work, Mi-sol took out So-dong's videos to watch. Even when she was promoted to host a TV show, Mi-sol couldn't be happy because the person who was supposed to share her joy now had no reason to. At this moment, Seok-bin looked at the photo of his son on his phone. The more he looked, the happier he became. He went straight to the kindergarten and happily picked up Dong-moon. He also gave the boy a phone. He hoped that he could hear his voice often. But when Mi-sol went to work that day, she found out about this. The boy received a gift from his father, but was scolded by his mother. Mi-sol told him that he shouldn't accept things from strangers, but Dong-moon explained that this was a gift from Seok-bin. At this time, Dong-moon still did not know that the Seok-bin that the boy mentioned was his biological father. Because when Mi-sol was pregnant, Seok-bin had heartlessly abandoned her, so she did not want the child to recognize Seok-bin. She asked the boy to return the phone, but Dong-un cried and said that the boy really liked Seok-bin. After Mi-sol took the phone away, Dong-un said that the boy hated his sister. This made Mi-sol very heartbroken. At this time, Suna told Mi-sol that Seok-bin came to see her this afternoon and wanted to see Dong-un often. At first she did not agree, but thinking about how painful it would be if they were parents and could not see their child, she also softened and agreed to Seok-bin and let him visit the child occasionally. Mi-sol was very helpless about this. On the other side, when Woo-dong heard the news of the two breaking up, he found So-dong downstairs at the company. He said that Mi-sol had been very sad recently. He hoped that So-dong wouldn't give up. The more difficult the situation, the more you have to rely on each other. But So-dong could only say sorry. Woo-dong angrily grabbed So-dong's shirt and said that he had really trusted the wrong person. So-dong's pained expression was accidentally seen by Seok-bin. He was very satisfied with this. Today, when So-dong's parents were talking to Sarah, they suddenly discovered that Sarah's Sarah's expression was not normal, as if she had something to say. Under the questioning of the two, Sarah finally told the truth. She said that So-dong's relatives had come to inquire about So-dong. Hearing that, Eun-hee immediately became worried and hurriedly asked who that person was, but she didn't know that it was Jung-ja. Just when Eun-hee was worried and didn't know what to do, So-dong returned home. He had drunk a little alcohol, so he wasn't very sober, but he still tried to reassure his mother. But when Eun-hee brought the milk, she found that So-dong, who had been smiling just now, was now silently crying. Eun-hee had no choice but to go out with a heavy heart. Today, while Mi-sol was working, she received a mission. A star was going to pick some delicious food to give to the staff of the orphanage that had taken care of the star since childhood. Mi-sol was in charge of interviewing that star. But when she entered, she discovered that the food supplier was So-dong's group. The two looked at each other, both filled with longing, but had no reason to talk. When Mi-sol passed by, So-dong's hand moved, but in the end he still didn't have the courage. During the interview, she discovered that the person the star wanted to thank was Mrs. Kim, who had picked up So-dong. Mi-sol didn't know about this. In order to complete the mission, Mi-sol posted a search for Mrs. Kim on the TV station. At the same time, So-dong also knew about the process of adoption him from his mother. The mother and son hugged each other and felt this rare family affection. Then, following So-dong's mother's advice, he went to Mrs. Kim's house. After asking, Mrs. Kim told So-dong that his aunt had come a few days ago but did not leave any contact information. At night, Eun-hee covered So-dong with a blanket while he was sleeping. Seeing her son struggling so much, Eun-hee decided to help So-dong find his identity. Eun-hee asked Mrs. View Kim to contact them if she met that person again. On the other side, Sok-bin went to Mi-sol and said that he wanted to see his son at least once a week. Otherwise, he would use extreme measures. After Mi-sol reluctantly agreed, Sok-bin wanted to rekindle their old love but was mercilessly rejected by Mi-sol because in her heart there was only So-dong. That day, when Mrs. Kim went out, she accidentally met Jung-ja, who went to the kindergarten to visit Dong-eun. Mrs. Kim happily told Jung-ja that So-dong was looking for her, scaring Jung-ja so much that she ran away in a hurry. Mrs. Kim then told this story to So-dong's family. After knowing that the meeting place was the kindergarten, they decided to look for this person through the surveillance camera, but the surveillance camera only showed the aunt's back. They could only confirm that she was not a kindergarten employee. Everyone was disappointed once again. Watching So-dong leave, sadly his parents couldn't help but feel sorry for him. That day, Sarah went to Mrs. Kang's house. During the conversation, Sarah told her that So-dong was adopted 30 years ago. Mrs. Kang was very surprised when she heard it. Her nephew was also abandoned 30 years ago. She didn't know if it was the same person, but thinking back, it was impossible because Jung-ja had told her that the child had died a long time ago. Sarah also said that someone claiming to be aunt came to visit So-dong, but Jung-ja heard these words as soon as she entered the door. She was so scared that she spilled her cup of tea. She didn't expect things to develop like this. Mrs. Kang knew that So-dong wasn't the biological son, so finding the closest relative wasn't far away. Jung-ja nervously asked for opinions again. Jung-ja discovered that Mrs. Kang didn't dare to think that So-dong was her nephew. Only then did Jung-ja breathe a sigh of relief. As for So-dong, he was so sad that he could only drink to drown his sorrows. He didn't know when he had gotten drunk in front of Mi-sol's house. At this moment, Mi-sol came home from work and saw him. Her heart couldn't help but ache. The once energetic young man now only knew how to numb himself with alcohol. Even so, he still came here unconsciously, showing how deeply So-dong loved her. After calling So-dong's parents, Mi-sol sat next to So-dong. At this moment, So-dong suddenly slipped, so Mi-sol hurriedly pulled him back, but he fell on her. The feeling of intimacy for a long time made Mi-sol want to hold So-dong's hand. After hesitating for a while, Mi-sol finally gathered up her courage. At this moment, So-dong's parents suddenly arrived. When saying goodbye, So-dong was drunk and still reluctant to leave. Perhaps only in this state could he truly reveal his feelings, but in a place where they did not know, Sok-bin secretly saw everything. After returning home, So-dong's father advised Eun-hee to agree to let them date. Under Eun-hee's sharp gaze, he finally sided with his son. He said that he could not bear to see his son suffer. He thought that two people who truly loved each other should not be separated. But Eun-hee said that if Mi-sol did not have a child, she could agree, but with the current situation, she could not accept it. This made So-dong's father angry and left. Today was Jin-guk's birthday, so Mrs. Kang called Suna and the child to celebrate his birthday. But Dong-eun talked about Sok-bin buying him a phone in front of everyone. Hearing that, Jung-ja was so scared that she fainted. The whole family hurriedly put her to bed to rest. After a while, Jung-ja finally woke up. Seeing her son so worried, she didn't know what to do. If the current situation continued to develop, Sok-bin and Mi-sol's matter would soon be discovered by Mrs. Kang. After Jung-ja was fine, Sok-bin played with Dong-eun. That happy appearance was completely unlike someone who abandoned the child. At this moment, Yoon-jun walked in. Seeing that her husband liked the child very much, she couldn't help but touch her belly. She thought how good it would be if that didn't happen. On the other side, So-dong was working, but suddenly stopped. He remembered the days he spent with Mi-sol. At the same time, Mi-sol also remembered everything before. Then she looked at the newspaper article that was posted looking for Mrs. Kim. Mi-sol felt that there would be news very soon. At this moment, the news that was supposed to be broadcast by Yoon-jun suddenly changed to Mi-sol. It was her first time doing a live report and she seemed a bit nervous. But as soon as she entered the broadcast mode, she suddenly suddenly ran to the side. At this time, there was a child in the middle of the road, so Mi-sol ran to pick up the child. Then Mi-sol continued to complete the live news. After finishing the news, Mi-sol was very worried. She didn't know how to explain to her superiors, but her action of saving the child received the support of many netizens. Mi-sol was also praised a lot. Yoon-jung, who was standing next to her, was so angry that she couldn't stand it. At this moment, Mi-sol received a phone call. It was Mrs. Kim's daughter calling. Mi-sol hurriedly ran outside. After knowing that Mi-sol posted a search notice, Jung-ja immediately became worried. If just like that, Mi-sol would most likely find Mrs. Kim through the TV station, causing their family to lose everything. So Jung-ja wanted to think of a way to kick Mi-sol out of the TV station. But Jung-ja didn't know that Mi-sol had found Mrs. Kim. At first, Mi-sol wanted to invite Mrs. Kim to appear on TV, but she didn't care about fame and fortune. Mrs. Kim just wanted to live a peaceful life. Mi-sol was helpless and let Mrs. Kim consider it further. On the other hand, Woo Dong and his girlfriend Soo Bin's love also fell into crisis. Sarah didn't want to marry her daughter to a man who had nothing. In anger, Soo Bin left home to go to her boyfriend's house. Just as they were eating, Dongmoon discovered a stranger coming to the house. The shrill scream attracted Suna. Seeing the younger brother bringing his girlfriend home, Suna didn't blame him, but only hoped that Soo Bin could tell her family to avoid worrying her relatives. But at this time, Sarah came and wanted to take her daughter away without saying a word. But suddenly, Soo Bin felt nauseous. They went to the hospital for a checkup and discovered that Sun Bin was 5 months pregnant. Sarah was furious, but her daughter was pregnant, so she could only helplessly go to Mi-sol's house to talk about their marriage. At this time, Soo Bin had perfectly explained what passionate love was. Soo Bin didn't need a house, didn't need a car, and even agreed to have a child first before getting married. Today, when Mi-sol had just arrived at the TV station to work, a female fan suddenly ran up to ask for a photo. It turned out that they were attracted by Mi-sol's action of saving the baby. But Yoon-jung, who was standing next to her, was very angry. Yoon-jung was jealous that Mi-sol had stolen her attention. Coincidentally, because of this, Mi-sol was valued by her superiors. The superiors wanted to break the rules and promote Mi-sol to be a TV host. And the main competitor was Yoon-jung. Yoon-jung threatened Mi-sol to give up the casting, but Mi-sol rejected her. In a fit of anger, Yoon-jung bought expensive red wine to bribe her superior. But on the contrary, this made her superior look down on her even more. The next day at the casting, Mi-sol beat Yoon-jung with So-dong's lucky watch. But just as Mi-sol was feeling excited about this, Jung-ja ran to the internet cafe. Jung-ja asked a gamer to post the story of Mi-sol being pregnant and giving birth while in high school online. This action directly caused Mi-sol to lose her job immediately. The superior asked Mi-sol if this post was true. Mi-sol was very upset when her past was exposed, but she still nodded and admitted to this. Therefore, the position she had just had was gone. She was even suspended from work and lost her job. And behind all of this was Jung-ja's doing. Jung-ja didn't want Mi-sol to continue working at the TV station. Just when Mi-sol was feeling down, she received a phone call from her son. Dong-eun wanted her to pick him up, but when Mi-sol arrived, she found Seok-bin there too. It turned out that the two of them had collaborated to trick her. Mi-sol had no choice but to sit down helplessly. At this moment, Yoon-jung, who had just left the restaurant, accidentally discovered them. Seeing the three of them sitting together, Yoon-jung was extremely angry. She went straight to the three of them and questioned what they meant. Mi-sol was afraid of scaring the child, so she wanted to leave, but was pulled back by Yoon-jung. At this time, Seok-bin stood up to stop Yoon-jung. Yoon-jung angrily asked Seok-bin if the child was his. Seok-bin stuttered and did not dare to answer. But as soon as Yoon-jung chased after Mi-sol again, Seok-bin directly shouted not to harm the child. At this time, Yoon-jung also determined that Seok-bin was the child's father. Yoon-jung collapsed. She thought that Seok-bin had tricked her when she went to study abroad in the US. But Seok-bin thought that this was not important. Hearing this, Yoon-jung seemed to go crazy. She asked Seok-bin why he treated her like that. But Seok-bin said that it was his freedom to meet whoever he wanted. On the other side, So-dong knew that Mi-sol was suspended from work, so he told Suna about it. Suna couldn't believe it. Yesterday, her daughter had just been promoted, so why did it turn out like this today? At this time, Mi-sol was carrying her child on her back on the street. So-dong looked very heartbroken. He hugged the child and took Mi-sol home. Suna was waiting at the door. Seeing her mother's worried expression, Mi-sol didn't know what to say. The mother and daughter hugged each other tightly. When they got home, Suna asked Mi-sol who wanted to harm her, but Mi-sol didn't answer and said that it was her fault. If she had been brave enough to face the child from the beginning, this wouldn't have happened. She told her mother that from now on, she would become Dongmun's real mother. But Suna thought of something, so Suna rushed to Seok-bin's door and asked if Jung-ja did it, but of course she wouldn't admit it. Jung-ja asked Suna for evidence. Suna went crazy and told her to just wait. It wasn't until Suna left that Jung-ja gently poked her head out. Just as Suna angrily returned, she met Jin-guk again. Seeing her boyfriend's worried expression, she couldn't stand it anymore and threw herself straight into Jin-guk's arms. Having endured so much, Suna really needed someone to lean on. She felt like she had harmed her daughter. If she had let Mi-sol be the child's mother from the beginning, there wouldn't have been so many problems now. But now it's too late to regret. Today, Jung-ja was washing cups but was asked by Yoon-jung to cook dinner for her. Jung-ja already hated Yoon-jung. Jung-ja refused without thinking, but Yoon-jung said that her nephew wanted to eat. Hearing that, Junja was so angry that she couldn't speak. Junja dragged Yoonjung into the room and asked that she wanted to cause trouble, but Yoonjung was not afraid. She no longer felt guilty towards Seokbin. She directly said that she was pregnant with the child. Now this was the only thing for the Seokbin family to gain Mrs. Khan's trust. If they didn't treat her well, the previous agreements would be directly cancelled. This made Junja very angry, but she couldn't do anything. Junja was about to scold Yoonjung when she heard Yoonjung talking about Misol's child. Junja hurriedly stepped forward to cover Yoonjung's mouth, but was pushed down on the bed. At this time, Seokbin got home from work. He happened to see his mother being pushed down, but he couldn't do anything about Yoonjung's anger. So Junja had to wake up in the middle of the night to cook rice. Junja even had to bring it to Yoonjung, who was lying on the bed herself. But as soon as she turned around, she started complaining to her son that it was this late and Yoonjung was still making her cook rice. Junja had long had an opinion about Yoonjung. If it weren't for the child in Yoonjung's belly that could help them seize the family's assets, she would have kicked Yoonjung out of the house long ago. But before the child was born, they could only try to pamper Yoonjung. After his mother left, Seokbin took out his phone. He looked at the photo with his son. His angry face smiled again. On the other side, Suna advised Misol not to rush to get Dongwon as her son, but Misol said that she didn't want to live in hiding anymore. She was preparing to go through the household registration transfer procedures the next day. But on the way to take her child to kindergarten, Misol met Yoonjung again. Yoonjung rushed forward to hit Misol, but Misol grabbed her hand. This time, Misol no longer held back and told Yoonjung everything. But Yoonjung didn't believe her. Yoonjung threatened Misol not to contact Seokbin anymore, or Yoonjung would take her child away. On the way home, Misol suddenly received a call from the kindergarten. She rushed to school. It turned out that Dongwon had beaten his classmate. The other boy said that Suna was not Dongwon's mother, but a fake mother, and that Misol was Dongwon's mother, so the classmates' mothers did not let them play with Dongwon. After learning about the situation, Misol and Suna were very angry. The two of them took Dongwon away directly. Misol wanted to carry Dongwon, but was refused because Dongwon did not want to believe that his older sister was his mother. Suna was also very heartbroken. It was Suna who let Misol be Dongwon's older sister. Now, it had turned out like this. Misol did not want to continue like this. She told her mother to let her adopt her son as soon as possible, but these words were heard by Dongwon standing at the door. Knowing his background, Dongwon left home alone. Then he called Seokbin crying and said that he was very upset. Seokbin was very worried when he heard it, so he rushed to Dongwon. After searching for a while, Seokbin finally found his son in the pipe. Dongwon said that the boy already knew that Misol was his mother. The boy was also ridiculed by his classmates for not having a father. At this time, Seokbin was very upset. He wanted to tell Dongwon that he was the boy's father, but he couldn't say it. He could only inform Misol to pick up his son. When they parted, he wiped Dongwon's tears. No matter how bad Seokbin was, he still loved his son very much. When he got home, he could only drink alone. Remembering his son's heartbroken appearance, Seokbin was in great pain. He regretted abandoning Misol. Junja asked what happened, and Seokbin said that someone had reported Misol online and revealed that Misol was pregnant and gave birth when she was still in high school, but he didn't know that his mother was the one who did it. The next day, when Seokbin was preparing to go to work, Junja looked for him again to discuss countermeasures. Junja asked if Yoonjung was calm now. Did she have any bad intentions? Junja was worried that Yoonjung would tell Mrs. Kang everything. The more Junja thought about it, the angrier she got. Junja said that she would just wait until the child was born and then chase Yoonjung away. But these words were accidentally heard by Yoonjung standing outside the door. It turned out that in Junja and Seokbin's eyes, she was just a tool to fight for property. Remembering Junja's cruel words, Yoonjung directly carried her suitcase out the door. When Junja stopped her, she finally exploded, saying that she would rather leave than let them get what they wanted. Junja quickly called to apologize and said that she was just angry for a moment. But Yoonjung no longer wanted to be humiliated by others. She said that she would return to America. As soon as Yoonjung entered the train station, Junja ran to pull her back. Junja said that she would treat Yoonjung like her own daughter in the future, but these words still couldn't keep Yoonjung. On this side, ever since he said to broke up with Misol, So-dong has been sad all day. He thought that this would be a way to repay his parents for raising him, but today, he really couldn't stand it anymore. He bravely told his mother that he wanted to start over with Misol. Unexpectedly, Eunhee got angry and left. At this time, his father encouraged So-dong to be brave in pursuing love. His father would convince Eunhee. Even Sarah, who didn't like to cause trouble, supported So-dong in pursuing his happiness. Then So-dong called Misol out. So-dong smiled and asked Misol to start over because his parents had agreed. Now no one could separate them anymore. Hearing that, Misol couldn't hold back her tears. She wasn't comfortable during the time they were apart. She only thought of So-dong. She endured everything without saying anything. On the other side, Yoonjung's departure was discovered by Mrs. Khan. Junja had to lie that Yoonjung was only going to her biological mother's house for a while. But this matter could not be hidden for long. Junja intended to let Seokbin pick Yoonjung up, but Seokbin's mind was not on this matter. Today, Misol took her son on a trip because she wanted to increase her affection for him. After a day of playing, they had a lot of fun. But at night, because she couldn't assemble the toys, Dongwon took advantage of the moment when Misol wasn't paying attention to call Seokbin. Misol was very embarrassed and told Seokbin Seok-bin to leave quickly. After putting her son to sleep, Seok-bin went out. The next morning, So-dong happily said goodbye to his parents. He knew that Mi-sol took Dong-won on a trip. He also prepared a surprise for her, so he didn't tell Mi-sol in advance and went there directly. Unexpectedly, when he arrived, he saw a scene he didn't want to see. Mi-sol was also very surprised. She thought Seok-bin had left last night, so Dong was very upset at the moment. Mi-sol had told him that she and her son were the only ones going out, but now he saw Seok-bin. Although she had always told herself that it was just a coincidence, as a man, So-dong couldn't help but feel a little uncomfortable. Mi-sol also knew that So-dong was uncomfortable, but she couldn't take away Seok-bin's right to see his child, and that was unfair to So-dong. She cried and told So-dong to listen to his mother and give up on a woman who already had a child like her. At this point, So-dong also calmed down. He knew that Mi-sol didn't want that either. After returning home, Sun-ah found out about this. Sun-ah blamed Mi-sol for still seeing Seok-bin. Did Mi-sol think that So-dong wasn't under enough pressure? Mi-sol had no other choice at this point. Seeing Dong-won happily with Seok-bin, she couldn't bear to separate the two. Sun-ah thought that wasn't right. Sun-ah goes to Jungja and tells her to take good care of her son and not let him affect Mi-sol's life anymore. On the other side, Seok-bin was recalling the fun time he had with his son last night, but was interrupted by his mother. Jungja blamed Seok-bin for going to look for Mi-sol. She wanted her son to bring Yoon-jung back so that he could inherit the property smoothly. Seok-bin was very upset, but could only do as his mother said. At the same time, So-dong was working and remembered what happened yesterday. So-dong asked Seok-bin to meet and told that you not to interfere in my and Mi-sol's story anymore. Seok-bin asked So-dong what qualifications he had. So-dong said that he would marry Mi-sol and then become Dong-won's father. This made Seok-bin angry. When he left, Seok-bin also mocked So-dong. Seok-bin said that So-dong didn't understand what father-son love was like. This made So-dong very angry. So-dong grabbed Seok-bin's shirt and wanted to beat him up, but Reason told So-dong to calm down. That day, Jin-guk called Sun-ah out and wanted to propose again, but Sun-ah refused. Feeling upset, Jin-guk wanted to have a reason. Reluctantly, Sun-ah prepared to explain the reason, but at this time, Jin-guk received a phone call. He learned that the person who kidnapped Mi-sol and ruined his wedding was Seok-bin. He angrily returned home and punched Seok-bin directly. Jin-guk angrily questioned Seok-bin why he did that. Seok-bin argued directly with Jin-guk. Despite his mother's objections, he directly said that he was Dong-won's father. If Jin-guk married Sun-ah, he and Dong-won would become cousins. This was unacceptable to him. Seok-bin's father, Jin-tae, was shocked to hear this. He had never known about this, so he decided to pack up and leave because he was embarrassed. But Jungja said that if he left, what would happen to the child in Yoon-jung's womb? Thinking about his son becoming a father, Jin-tae knelt down in front of Jin-guk and begged his brother to forgive Seok-bin just once. Although Jin-guk was very angry, in order to maintain peace in the family, he still chose not to pursue it further. It was just that when facing Sun-ah, Jin-guk made too many mistakes. The next day, Jin-tae and his wife came to apologize to Sun-ah. Jin-tae said that he was very sorry for what his wife and Seok-bin had done. If Sun-ah had any difficulties in life, she could contact him. Being threatened by her husband, Jungja reluctantly bowed her head and apologized. After this incident, Jungja prepared for her son to go to the US to bring Yoon-jung back. But that day, Yoon-jo, who was supposed to go abroad, appeared on TV. That proved that Yoon-jung was definitely at the TV station at the time. Knowing the situation, Seok-bin went directly to Yoon-jung. It turned out that Yoon-jung had not been abroad before. She just didn't want to be used by Jungja and Seok-bin anymore. So when Seok-bin came to find her, but she refused to go back. On the other side, So-dong and Mi-sol were taking Dong-eun out, but a car passed by and was about to hit Dong-eun. At that dangerous moment, So-dong rushed to shield Dong-eun, but he was hit the car. Mi-sol was very heartbroken by this, but So-dong said that she was Dong-eun's mother, so he had to protect Dong-eun well to bring her true happiness. Mi-sol was very touched when she heard that and hugged So-dong. Eun-hee also didn't want to stop them anymore, and went to Mi-sol and said that if the two of them really wanted to be together, then if So-dong couldn't control himself in the future because of raising the children, she hoped that Mi-sol wouldn't doubt So-dong's heart and don't make So-dong suffer because of the children. Mi-sol had no opinion on this matter, so Eun-hee also agreed to let the two of them be together. Mi-sol was very touched because she could finally be with So-dong. The two mothers even set an engagement date. On the other side, Mrs. Khan went to Yoon-jung to take her home, but Yoon-jung looked at Jungja and said that she didn't want to live with Seok-bin anymore. But under Mrs. Kang's sincere advice, Yoon-jung had to endure and return. But not long after returning, she discovered a photo of Seok-bin and Dong-eun. The day the photo was taken happened to be the day she moved out. Yoon-jung angrily went to Seok-bin to talk things out, but before she could say a few words, Jungja arrived. Jungja scolded Yoon-jung for not interfering in unrelated matters. Yoon-jung angrily went to Mrs. Khan and told her that Dong-eun was Seok-bin's child. Mrs. Kang was shocked when she heard such a big thing, and she only told her now. Mrs. Kang angrily called the whole family together. Mrs. Kang criticized Seok-bin for being irresponsible and deceiving her. Jungja and Seok-bin were afraid of being punished, so they lied that they had just found out about this. They also blamed Mi-sol for hiding the child from them, and they decided to find a chance to take the child back. Jungja brought a gift to Mi-sol's house. When she learned that Mi-sol and So-dong were engaged, Jungja said that it was inconvenient to bring a child to the wedding, or should Mi-sol give the child to their family to raise. Hearing that, Suna immediately got angry and threw salt at her. Jungja angrily returned home to tell Sokbin that Sodong and Misol were about to get engaged. Jungja also said that his son was about to call Sodong dad. Sokbin was very angry. He would absolutely not let his son call someone else dad. That day, Sokbin came to Misol. He said that if she really wanted to marry Sodong, then she should give him the child to raise. But Misol didn't pay any attention to him. That day, Sodong took Dongun to the river to fish. On the way, he went back to the car to get his things. But when Sodong returned, he couldn't find Dongun, so he hurriedly went looking everywhere. Misol was very worried when she heard what happened. Her son was her life, so nothing could happen to him. At the same time, Sokbin also ran over. He didn't say a word but grabbed Sodong by the collar. Luckily, they found Dongmun not long after. It turned out that Dongun didn't listen to Sodong and ran into the woods and got lost. That's why this happened. After returning home, Sodong hid in his room alone. His mother knew what happened and came in. She comforted Sodong that since he had decided to be with Misol, something like this would definitely happen. It didn't matter how well Sodong treated the child. As long as there was one mistake, Sodong would become a sinner. Jungja took this opportunity to bring Dong-un in front of Sokbin. She also said that this was the boy's father. After many years Misol hard work raising the child, they now wanted to take the child back. After negotiating with Misol without any results, Sekbin filed a lawsuit in court to request custody of the child. Misol didn't expect him to go this far. She went to Sokbin to beg him not to do it, but Sokbin gave Misol two choices. One is to give up on marrying Sodong. Two is to hand Dongwon over to him. At this time, Sodong entered and grabbed the lawsuit. Looking at the content inside, Sodong was so angry that he couldn't speak. He said that Sokbin was really stubborn. Then Sodong pulled Misol out. Sodong said that she didn't need to be patient and beg him. Just as the two were arguing, Sun-ah happened to pass by. Knowing what happened, she immediately rushed into Sokbin's house. Sun-ah argued with Jungja and asked them to withdraw the lawsuit, but Jungja didn't listen. Jungja said that no matter what, they had to get the child back. At this time, Mrs. Khan came out, but the child's mother on one side and the child's father on the other. There was no need to be so tense. Mrs. Kang called both families together and came up with a satisfactory solution. The child would be raised by Misol's family, but the household registration would remain at Sokbin's house. Misol reluctantly agreed, but Sokbin did not want to leave Sodong alone. That day, Mrs. Kang assigned Sodong an important reception task. Mrs. Kang told Sodong to complete the task seriously, but Sokbin made an appointment to meet Bom Hun. Bom Hun was Sodong's subordinate and close friend. Sokbin takes advantage of Bom Hun's mother's medical treatment to bribe him. Sokbin asked Bom Hun to change the reception time. In order to treat his mother, Bom Hun betrayed his longtime good friend Sodong, causing Sodong to see the wrong time. When the foreign delegation arrived, Sodong was still confused. He clearly remembered that there was still a day left until the appointment time, but when he went back to look for the time record, he could not find it. This mistake made Mrs. Kang angry. Mrs. Kang called a staff meeting to criticize Sodong. The other side had arrived at the scheduled engagement time, but Sodong had not arrived yet. Both parents were very embarrassed until the engagement party was cancelled. Sodong still did not show up. Sun-ah looked at her daughter sadly and felt extremely heartbroken, but they all knew that Sodong must have had a reason. After the meeting ended, Sodong discovered that it was past the engagement time. He rushed over and saw Misol still waiting for him. She did not ask why he was late, but hugged Sodong and comforted him not to blame himself. The two could still get engaged. Then Sodong took the engagement rings and put them on Misol's hand. At this time, he hoped that the two would be together forever. The next day at work, Sodong was demoted. Although he was very sad, Sodong did not blame too much. Bom Hun, who was next to him, also felt guilty, but he had no choice for the time being. That day, when Mrs. Khan went out, she accidentally saw Mrs. Kim. Mrs. Khan even went up to greet her in a friendly manner, but Mrs. Kim said that her last name was not Kim. After Mrs. Kang questioned her for a while, Mrs. Kim finally told the truth. Mrs. Kang heard Mrs. Kim tell her that the previous deception that her grandson was dead was completely directed by Jungja. Mrs. Kang could not have imagined that Jungja, who was always smiling in front of her, would want to take her property. Jungja was frightened by Mrs. Kang's expression. At this moment, the doorbell rang, and Jungja discovered that the person who came was Mrs. Kim. Jungja appeared to be panicked, but Mrs. Kang told her to open the door. But the person who came said that her last name was not Kim. Then Mrs. Kang asked Mrs. Kim who directed her to deceive her. Mrs. Kim immediately pointed at Jungja. Jungja saw this and immediately knelt down to beg for forgiveness. Jungja said that she did it completely for Mrs. Kang's health. Jungja did not want Mrs. Kang to miss her grandson and affect her health. Such an absurd lie, but Jungja told it to the point of crying miserably. At this moment, Mrs. Kang suddenly thought that if they had deceived her, would her grandson still be alive? Kang quickly sent someone to find the orphanage director. As for Jungja, she only needed to find that person first, so that she could hide the fact that Sodong was Mrs. Kang's nephew. A few days later, Jungja received a phone call that made her extremely happy because the orphanage director suddenly passed away from a heart attack due to losing a horse race. The only person who knew the clue about Sodong had disappeared, so Jungja finally breathed a sigh of relief. On the other side, although Sodong was transferred to work at the counter downstairs, that did not affect his love for Misol. The two were engaged. They could always feel each other's sweetness. The two even planned to take Dongmun out together, but Dongmun refused because the school arranged an assignment to take a photo with his parents. They also wanted the two to take Dongmun to the movies. At this time, Sodong walked in and asked why Dongmun was crying. Dongmun said that the older sister is not married to the older brother yet, so he is not father yet. Sodong was very embarrassed. Mi-sol also felt guilty towards Sodong, so she got angry at her son. After knowing the matter, Sodong allowed Mi-sol to satisfy the boy's wish. He also said that he would not be sad, but Mi-sol was very concerned. She knew that Sodong was definitely not feeling happy. Finally, with Sodong's encouragement, Mi-sol and Seok-bin took Dong-un to the movies. When they went out, they also cooperated with the child to take pictures. At this time, Yoon-jung was celebrating her birthday and happened to pass by and saw it. Mi-sol also discovered Yoon-jung, so she quickly told Seok-bin to come forward and explain. After being pulled back by Seok-bin, Yoon-jung appeared very distressed. She said that she was a woman who had no right to dream about Seok-bin, but they still did not break up. At least on her birthday every year, she thought that maybe they could have a meal together and watch a movie. But Seok-bin said that he didn't know Yoon-jung's birthday. Yoon-jung felt so desperate, she touched her stomach and could only leave with a heartbroken heart. But halfway there, her stomach suddenly hurt so badly that she had to call Jung-ja. Jung-ja went out to see and saw that she was bleeding a lot, so Jung-ja rushed Yoon-jung to the hospital. Unfortunately, Yoon-jung had a miscarriage. Jung-ja angrily shouted at Yoon-jung, who was lying on the hospital bed. At this time, Yoon-jung finally understood the sadness of loving the wrong person. After Yoon-jung returned home, Seok-bin rarely brought her meals personally. Hearing Yoon-jung cry, Seok-bin also felt a little reluctant, so he decided to give up and let Yoon-jung find the life she wanted. He took out the divorce agreement that he had prepared a long time ago and gave it to Yoon-jung as a birthday present. This is probably the most unforgettable birthday gift she has ever received. But Yoon-jung still loves Seok-bin, so she hopes that he can come to America with her and stop fighting over things that don't belong to him. But even such a gentle act can't stop Seok-bin's ambition. But Jung-ja doesn't want Yoon-jung to leave. Even if the child is gone, the two of them must adopt a child to give to Jin-guk. This makes Seok-bin strongly object. Unexpectedly, Mrs. Kang came over at this time and heard everything. After a while of questioning, Yoon-jung knelt down in front of Mrs. Kang and told the truth. Yoon-jung said that Jung-ja and Seok-bin said that only by giving the child to Jin-guk could they receive the company's assets. This statement shocked Mrs. Kang to the point of almost fainting. Mrs. Kang immediately kicked Seok-bin's family out. They were helpless and had to move out that night. Jin-guk also felt guilty because of this. He felt that it was because he let his sister-in-law move into the house that he had caused the consequences like today. So he resigned from the chairmanship with Mrs. Kang and calmly thought about the life he had lived. But Seok-bin did not want to leave. He told Director Park to prepare the money and follow his orders, whether he succeeded or failed just this once. On the other side, Sodong asked his mother if there was anything else when he picked him up. Eun-hee thought for a moment, then took out a box from under the wardrobe. Inside were the clothes that Sodong had wrapped up at that time and a letter. Sodong opened the letter. It was written that he was a pitiful child because of his difficult fate. He could only choose this way. He hoped to meet good parents to raise him up. At this time, Sarah discovered that the envelope had a signature starting with Kang. Sodong seemed to have thought of something, so he hurriedly ran to Mrs. Kim's house. He got an identical envelope. Looking at the signature left on it, Sodong saw hope again to find his relatives. That day when Mrs. Kang went to the orphanage to donate, she asked the director if he knew that Mrs. Kim worked here 30 years ago. The director immediately thought of someone. Then the director took out a newspaper on which was Mrs. Kim's identity. Miss Kang also got the contact information from the director. Remembering that the newspaper she saw earlier was missing a corner, Mrs. Kang thought that Jung-ja must have torn it off on purpose. Mrs. Kang quickly called the contact information that the director gave her. Unexpectedly, no one answered. Not long after, Mrs. Kim came back from the market and found that she had missed a call, so she called back. Mrs. Kang picked up the phone and immediately asked Mrs. Kim if she had worked at an orphanage before. After receiving Mrs. Kim's confirmation, Mrs. Kang was so moved that she asked Mrs. Kim if she knew where the child was 30 years ago. As soon as Mrs. Kim said the name Sodong, Mrs. Kang was so moved that she fainted. Mrs. Kang was about to fall down when Sodong saw her. He quickly went to help Mrs. Kang. Mrs. Kang had a hard time finding her grandson, but she suffered a heart attack and had to be hospitalized. Sodong wanted to stay and wait for Mrs. Kang to wake up, but Jung-ja chased him away. They were afraid that Mrs. Kang would recognize Sodong when she woke up. Seok-bin also found the phone that Mrs. Kang had dropped. He called Mrs. Kim. When Mrs. Kim asked what happened, Seok-bin lied that he was Mrs. Kang's son. He also said that Mrs. Kang had lost her memory, so she didn't need to pay attention to what Mrs. Kang had said before. Then he took apart the phone and threw it in the trash. Mrs. Kang was unconscious and Jin-guk didn't know where she went. This was the best opportunity for Seok-bin to act. He arranged for Director Park to embezzle the company's reserve fund to buy a large amount of shares in the group. At the shareholders meeting, Director Park also nominated Seok-bin as the interim chairman. Jung-ja was very excited when she received the news. Her son had finally succeeded in taking power. Although Seok-bin was only the temporary chairman, if Mrs. Kang did not wake up, the entire group would fall into Seok-bin's hands. That day, Sodong went to visit Mrs. Kang again. He was still chased out by Jung-ja. When he left, he suddenly quickly discovered that Mrs. Kang had moved her fingers. Despite Jungja's objections, So-dong called the doctor, but after examining her, the doctor discovered that it was just a natural muscle reflex, with no signs of waking up. But Jungja was afraid that Mrs. Kang would wake up. She raised her hand to remove Mrs. Kang's oxygen mask that was keeping her alive. At the last moment, her remaining reasons stopped her. Although she could not do anything, in order for her son to take control of the entire group, Jungja did not allow others to visit Mrs. Kang. Sun-ah contacted Jin Guk many times, but Jin Guk was on a relaxing trip and did not turn on his phone. That day, So-dong was working when he suddenly received a phone call. Mi-sol said that she saw the same signature on So-dong's envelope, which was the signature that Mrs. Kang left when she funded the orphanage. But the director did not want to reveal her identity. At Mi-sol's request, they got the phone number. But when So-dong called, the phone showed Mrs. Kang. This made the two of them unable to believe it. Could it be that Mrs. Kang was So-dong's grandmother? When he returned home, Mrs. Kim happened to visit So-dong's house. She said that a few days ago, someone called her and claimed to be So-dong's grandmother. This made So-dong very nervous. He quickly took Mrs. Kim's phone. When he pressed the call button, the contact person was still Mrs. Kang. At this point, So-dong was even more certain that Mrs. Kang was most likely his grandmother. On the other side, Seok-bin invited director Park and Bom-hun to dinner to celebrate the plan for tomorrow. Unexpectedly, their conversation was secretly recorded by Bom-hun. Bom-hun felt guilty towards So-dong, so he told So-dong about Seok-bin's plan to usurp the chairmanship. After knowing everything, So-dong sneaked into the hospital room when Seok-bin's family was not there. It seemed that Mrs. Kang felt the family affection, so she really woke up from her sleep. So-dong finally identified Mrs. Kang as his grandmother and knew that Mrs. Kang had heartlessly abandoned him to protect her daughter's reputation. But these things were no longer important. At this time, Seok-bin had been elected as the official chairman. Jungja sat proudly beside him and witnessed her son's moment of glory. But at this moment, So-dong objected. So-dong directly exposed Seok-bin's crimes. While Seok-bin was still confused and didn't understand what was going on, Mrs. Kang sat in a wheelchair and looked at Seok-bin with hatred. Jungja was also afraid and avoided Mrs. Kang's eyes. Jungja could only chase after and beg the police not to take her son away. Then Mrs. Kang took So-dong to see his mother. Although the scene of mother and son reunion was distant, So-dong was still very happy. Finally, he found his beloved mother. Mrs. Kang also thanked the In-hee family for raising her grandson so well. Jungja was miserable and begged the police. Her husband and daughter advised her to go home. Crimes must be punished. But Jungja still stubbornly came to ask Mrs. Kang to spare her son. Mrs. Kang asked if they were not afraid of being punished for doing such things. After speaking, Mrs. Kang called someone to drag Jungja away. Jungja was chased away but still lay outside the gate. She loudly said that even if she died, she would not leave this place. Jin-tae reminded her that everything was over. Looking at the cramped and dirty house, Jungja comforted her husband and daughter that Seok-bin had money and would definitely find them a big and good house. Seeing his wife like that, Jin-tae said that Seok-bin's accounts had been locked, so they could not buy a house anymore. Hearing that, she could not accept it and fainted. Only now did Jin-guk know that his wife once had a son named So-dong. He felt sorry for her, but Jin-guk didn't understand why his wife didn't tell him that year. If she did, Jin-guk would definitely sympathize with her. Mrs. Kang told her son-in-law about the evil things Seok-bin had done. She also said that she would never forgive Jungja and Seok-bin. She also apologized to Jin-guk about her daughter's matter, but Jin-guk wasn't angry at his wife at all. This made Mrs. Kang feel much better. Yoon-jung went to the police station to pick up Seok-bin. The two officially filed for divorce. She hugged the man she had loved deeply for the last time. Seeing Yoon-jung leave, Seok-bin felt disappointed. After that, Seok-bin went home to visit his family and then his son. Finally, he said goodbye to Mi-sol and quietly left. So-dong took Mi-sol home for dinner. Yoon-hee's actions also showed her acceptance of Mi-sol. Mrs. Kang wanted the two to get married soon. She wanted to see her two grandchildren live happily. Mi-sol officially returned to work at the TV station, while Yoon-jung resigned to return to the US. When the two met, they no longer hated each other, and then they shook hands and said goodbye. Jin-guk often came to Sun-ah's house, but only watched from afar. That day, Sun-ah came home from work and saw him. She asked him why he came without telling her. Jin-guk said that meeting like that would only make they feel sadder. Seeing Jin-guk about to leave, Sun-ah could only tell him to take care of his health. The two people who loved each other could only watch each other from afar from now on. Mi-sol felt heartbroken when she saw this scene. Returning home, Mi-sol hugged her mother tightly and felt that she was very sorry for her mother. Mi-sol also thanked her mother for silently sacrificing for her. Hearing these words, Sun-ah felt that all her sacrifices were worth it. Today was Mi-sol and So-dong's wedding day. The two mothers lit candles to congratulate the two. Everyone applauded. The bride and groom happily walked into the wedding hall, holding hands. Seok-bin could only stand from afar. The woman who was originally his had nothing to do with him anymore. He sadly left the wedding hall. While driving, he heard his mother calling. Seok-bin was about to answer when the accident happened. In a daze, he remembered the happy time with his son. It was the happiest time of his life. Jungja's family received the news and rushed to the hospital. Seeing her son lying on the hospital bed, she was extremely regretful. Now, she understood that she was the one who ruined Seok-bin's life. After getting married, Mi-sol and So-dong went to live with Mrs. Kang. Mi-sol was also pregnant, so so Mrs. Khan was also very happy. Sana was preparing to study abroad in the US at a medical school. Before leaving, she did not forget to visit Jin Guk, but she could only stand from afar. Sok Bin became a child after the accident. Perhaps this is the best price for him. Before leaving, Sana took Domun to meet Jungja. The two women, who had been enemies all their lives, finally sat down and talked. Jungja said that now she still had one wish, which was to hope that she would leave this world just one day later than Sok Bin. That way, she would be able to take care of Sok Bin for the rest of her life. Mi Sol and Sodom went to the airport to see Sana off. Mi Sol also teased Sana that if she met someone handsome on the plane, she would definitely date him. As soon as Sana sat down, she heard a very familiar voice. It was Jin Wook with his passport in hand. Surely from now on, the two of them could live their own lives. Above is the entire content of the movie. Thank you everyone for watching. Goodbye, and see you again in the next movies.